Let's see if this works. Okay, it does work. Alright, good evening, everybody. I figured I should probably watch this with our upcoming episode. Well, Kami, that's why I'm explaining. I figured I should probably watch this for the upcoming episode, so I figured if I had to suffer, so do you. Let's move ahead until we get to some people. Oh, it's gonna buffer. Not far enough. Go. See, you get to suffer with me. It might be.
Weird. Do I not have a green room? Oh, I do. What up, Semaphore? How you doing today?
A few days later, when the terror caused by the
Everybody, we need to be on tip-top audio game today, okay? So if shit cuts out, spam the chat. Alright? We gotta know if the fucking audio is not tip-top.
Don't care about this.
Airsox, I don't think the people are actually gonna watch this, believe it or not.
Surprise!
I think the people will, or I think it's too boring. To be frank.
Stop.
Carrying my L with not so much grace. It's alright, we all learn how to carry the L with grace eventually, you know?
You have not learned that yet, Will.
We learn.
I mean, it'll also be difficult to watch if you make it unlisted.
So... Black, I'm definitely not gonna watch this. You definitely are. You're gonna stick around and watch the whole thing.
No, I don't think the connection is throbbing. I'm also probably not going to do all 3 hours of this nonsense all night. I mean, I watched his discussion with poly people, and while I am no fan of poly people, I am also not necessarily a fan of Will. Okay, you need to get down.
Like, it's always Iron Horse who is like really hard to actually get on stream. I've been trying to get an on-stream conversation with him.
Oh yes, Will is not.
He's really hard to contact. And then like T-Jump and all.
Like,
these
I understand
other
where
guys
Polly is coming from, even if I don't agree. But Will is just
that are able to debate
clueless.
flatters and that shit all day.
What is the meat and potatoes of this nonsense? Here we go.
Alright, I'm gonna start pulling people in. Yep, man.
Okay.
I'm gonna get everybody's camera.
I'm on my
audio
phone.
set
I
up
hope
on-
that doesn't.
Should be fine.
Really shortly, like in a minute or so.
If at any point I turn mine off, it's just because there's a lot of distractions in the background, and I got a doggo here, so I don't want to
Just work.
cause
Come on.
distraction at any.
The good news is I will be having fiber sometime within the
Point,
coming
but,
year.
yeah.
The bad news is it's not here yet. Okay, let's take a hot second. Let that buffer. It also might be mad at me because I'm concurrently running 2 YouTube accounts at once. My personal account, so we don't get ads of any description, and the 2 guys talking to history account.
Yeah.
Oh, doggo.
She's so cute. I just recently earned her love, and I'm like so excited about it.
Oh, that's so great.
Let's figure
Yeah,
out
after
who
knowing
these
her for
people
2
are
years.
because it's not
So-
actually listed.
She finally likes me now, so.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not your end, it's my end. It's going. I just had to give it a hot second.
Gotta get everything centered. There we go.
Pretty much, yeah.
Is the stream buffering or is it just the video? Because the video is not loading properly tonight. Avery, you need to go sit down. Hey, we're back. Yeah. So how are you while we wait for this to go through? Howdy, Orin. We're just waiting for the video to buffer and then we're going to get going. We're not dropping any frames. Still in the IRA?
Never seen me before. My name is Johnny Scarlett. You can.
I mean, for those of you who didn't see it in the...
I saw that. I didn't see the stream, but I
Yeah.
saw you were doing that.
Damn, you came prepared. Good for you.
I picked up the new book edited by Kevin Cruz and
Will,
what's his
how much
face.
shit did you get like behind the scenes for doing this panel? Because like, I saw so many people giving you problems for that. I was just like, damn, bro, like I didn't know panels were suddenly so unpopular.
It's not that panels are unpopular. It was the attitude that Will copped going into it that was unpopular.
Like, I thought they were a normal thing to do.
Well, I think the main issue is there was a lot of question of my motive for doing this panel, but I'm hoping that we'll get that all squared out.
Ah,
How dare we talk about controversial issues?
Mm.
something never done before in the Twitch poll space. Very groundbreaking.
Well,
Yeah, I saw a panel, not a panel, but like a stream that you did a while back where you were talking about like your motivation and stuff like that, and everything seemed pretty benign to me.
well, thanks. I thought so. Personally.
Well, of course you thought so. However, when people are getting up and saying, Will, don't do this, Will, don't do this, is not really a good place to start.
I don't know. It really.
I really
it's,
wanted to.
I think people are just grifters, honestly. A lot of people, and I think that's just kind of what it boils down to, you know. I think anyone with an honest view would see that I was trying to do this with good intentions. So.
That's a logical fallacy right there.
I really wanted to watch you talk to poly people about this debate, and I could not bring myself to do it. So, you know.
Don't blame you.
I saw the title of the VOD.
Yeah, because she ate you alive.
I don't think I could do this without losing my mind.
Hey, Pippa.
All right, we're just waiting on Alexander, and we'll be good to go. Oh, just as I say that.
Hey, Sonia.
Zonia.
Hey, is my audio with my AirPods okay, or is it better without it? Because I can make it without it if it's a problem.
I think you sound fine currently.
Okay.
I'm fine right now.
Myself.
Denying, are you going to be no video today?
Alright.
No, don't be sorry. Totally fine.
This is 3.5 hours.
Well,
And we are
right on
only
the
half
dot.
an hour in.
Welcome everybody.
I mean, for those of you who didn't see it in the group chat, we've been having intermittent power issues here because of windstorms. So hopefully that doesn't interrupt this. But if I suddenly disappear, that's probably what it is.
Very good.
So what I'm really interested in who ended up showing up on this, because obviously it's not people like Mr. Girl, who probably wouldn't give Will the time of day anyway. And I'm really interested in the credentials of the people involved. Like, genocide studies is a pretty specific field. Like, Hetman does this. I don't. And just to get the prep work done for our upcoming episode in the end of January, I've been reading a whole ton of stuff that he has sent me and President Sunday has sent me. So I'm not entirely certain about the qualifications here. So let's see what happens.
Well, all right, everybody. Welcome to the trans genocide panel. It's been something that's it's been in the works for a couple of weeks, maybe longer than that even. But I think it is an important discussion to have. And I didn't see any kind of discourse, in my opinion, that was taking place on this that was serious. There was some serious discourse taking place, but I think that it was time that we gathered together a group of people to talk about this, and hopefully a nuanced and really beneficial way to the community. I have an opening prepared that I want to read, and then I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to ask the first question. I've already kind of instructed, this is for the chatters, I've already instructed all the panelists basically on the rules of the panel. Basically, we're trying to do 2-minute openers for each question, and then about a 10-minute back and forth, and we're going to try to make sure that everybody gets a good chunk of the conversation with each question. This opener that I'm going to read is something that everybody on the panel agrees with, and I kind of want this to be the anchor framework that we're going to have the rest of our discussion about. So, everyone here on this panel agrees that trans people face systemic discrimination all over the world. In America, face discrimination all over the world. In America, there are currently several efforts to effectively limit the ability for trans people to receive the health care that they need in 2 of the largest states in our union, Florida and Texas. Trans people suffer from an abnormally high suicide rate, and the most effective ways at lowering these rates is to both make a larger effort to integrate and destigmatize trans people, as well as ensure that they have access to gender-affirming care, if they so wish to receive it. It follows that making it harder for trans people to get the care that they need will potentially lead to an increase in the amount of trans people dying due to suicide. The first question that I want to ask, and just feel free and introduce yourselves. And remember, try to keep it to around 2 minutes, okay? I'm going to shut people down if they go too long. Is there a trans genocide? If yes, how far along are we in the process? If no, what would have to happen for you to consider it a genocide? And we're going to start with Johnny Scarlet.
Hi, what's up? If you've never seen me before, my name is Johnny Scarlet. You can find me on twitch.tv/Johnny Scarlet. I'm an educational channel. My answer to this is that while trans people do face a high amount of violence and excommunication from their communities, we are not an entirely genocidable group because we will continue to be born into future generations. The action.
Okay. So I kind of get what's being said here. First of all, who are you? But second of all, even if someone continues to be born into future generations, one of the things that is inherent to the trans experience is this ability to express yourself. If you take a situation where people are not free to express themselves, they're functionally unable to exist. Like, the idea isn't that we're going to kill all the trans people. The idea is that we make it so distasteful and difficult for them to receive what they need and to exist in society openly that they simply choose not to. That they hide. It's not substantially different than having Jews hide in attics.
Actual definition that I think meets this a little bit better is cultural genocide, at least for the current climate. I think that in that vein, we have a real responsibility to document our struggles, document our normal lives and our happiness, and know that
Let's
Come on, just
let's
work.
have Luxander go next. You're muted.
Shit, I'm muted. Okay, so sorry, I
Yes,
forget. I
erasure
always
of
put it on push to
exactly,
talk
grammar
so that I
comments,
can make
erasure
snide
and
comments
copyright and
to my chat.
practice.
Sorry, I'm joking. No, so I'm Luxander. You can find me at luxander.net. I stream on YouTube, but that's my website. I believe that we are experiencing what you would describe as a genocide. I typically appeal to the UN definition because I actually think that that's a fairly conservative definition. But if you look at a number of different definitions, like beyond that, you could like most certainly, if you expand beyond the UN, yes, for sure. What stage are we at? I just had this pulled up on my computer here. The 10 stages of genocide. I think we are so we're certainly at the point where property is being expropriated, I think, in the sense that it's not necessarily uncommon to see stories of like trans people having their bank accounts frozen because they don't sound like the correct gender over the phone. We saw the same thing happening to the finance.
So I used to work in a call center and a customer service environment. And one of the things that I did relatively as a matter of course was just take LGBTQ people at their word, because the policies of the company in question simply did not allow, like, they were not updated to allow for the existence of relationships that are not heterosexual. So that is absolutely a thing that happens. I don't think it's necessarily always a deliberate thing. It's oftentimes can be, but not necessarily can be, a case of a person not having really considered the outcomes and the consequences of a policy.
Finances of Jewish people pre World War II, I think it was. So yeah, like I think it's fair to say that we're right around stage 7, where like or perhaps stage 8, just depending on where you're looking at. You know, Texas recently tried to request information from their Department of Revenue about gender changes on driver's licenses, like, and it was discussed during the Florida recent change to the way that they approach this for youth, where they wanted to curate lists of trans people in both of these occasions. And I think that that's a very clear indication that we're quite deep in this process, according to the Holocaust Day Memorial.
So a list in and of itself is not necessarily a tool of genocide. It absolutely can be used as one, but it's a regular function of bureaucracy to assemble lists in most contexts. I don't want to go and say this is absolutely going to result in something bad happening, but because it's just a regular function of bureaucracy. It's not necessarily a problem, but it certainly can become one.
Memorial Trust, that's typically what I appeal to, is the 10 stages of genocide outlined by Gregory H. Stanton, and I will stop there.
Just for funsies. Oh, good. Classification. The differences between people are not respected. There's a division of us and them, which is carried out using stereotypes or excluding people who are perceived to be different. Symbolization. The visual manifesto of hatred. Jews in Nazi Europe were forced to wear yellow stars to show they were different. Discrimination. That's certainly happening. The dominant group denies the civil rights or even citizenship to identify groups. The 1935 Nuremberg laws stripped the Jews of their German citizenship and made it illegal for them to do many jobs or to marry German non-Jews. Those perceived as different are treated with no form of human rights or personal dignity. During the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, Tutsis were referred to as cockroaches. The Nazis often referred to Jews as vermin. Genocides are always planned. Yes. However, it's not beyond the pale that a massacre that leads into a genocide is off the cuff. Regimes of hatred often train those who go on to carry out the destruction of a people. Propaganda begins to be spread by hate groups. The Nazis used the newspaper Der Stürmer to spread and incite messages of hate about Jewish people. There is a degree to which anti-Semitism was incredibly common in Europe, and in Germany especially, prior to 1944. So this is kind of very, very narrowly viewed. Preparation. Perpetrators plan the genocide. They absolutely do. There was a great movie on Amazon about the Nuremberg laws and about the conference that the Nazi principles of planners of the Holocaust had. The name escapes me. Hang on. That ain't it. Hang on. I'll figure it out later. Anyway, persecution. Victims are identified because of their ethnicity or religion, and death lists are drawn up. People are sometimes separated into ghettos, deported, or starved, and property is often expropriated. Genocidal massacres began. 9. Extermination. The hate group murders are identified victims and deliberate and systemic campaign of violence. Oh, it's all right. We'll still be here. Millions of lives are destroyed or changed beyond recognition through genocide. It does not necessarily have to be millions of lives. Denial. The perpetrators or later generations deny the existence of any crime.
Excellent. Power bottom politics.
Yeah, I'm Power Bond Politics. He, him. I go by Oliver, so you can just call me that if it's shorter than the whole mouthful of a name. I don't believe there's a trans genocide happening in America right now. I think it's always possible for any minority to be genocided at some point in the future. And I will absolutely agree that trans people should be bracing themselves for a rise in hate crimes. However, I think this trans genocide discourse is a perfect example of people trying to eradicate nuance for the sake of ineffective, divisive, and emotionally manipulative language that really does nothing but cause inflammatory discourse and waste time, and offer some people the opportunity to sit in complacency and do nothing about it, as it instills a strong sense of hopelessness.
Okay. So this is a not uncommon thought that people have when they listen to discourse, particularly if they are trying to carve out a position in the center. Don't say the thing because the thing just makes it worse. People are going to be complacent irrespective of whether or not you say the thing. In this particular case, one of the things that I've been kicking around in my head about trans people is that at best that we can see, LGBTQ people in general and trans people represent an incredibly low percentage of the population relative to the whole American population. They are very easy to other because of this, because a person might not necessarily know that they're interacting with an LGBTQ person. You just don't know. They're very easy to other. They're very easy not to think about. They're very easy to be complacent about. So saying that calling out and raising an alarm to a set of circumstances is going to make the situation worse kind of leaves you nowhere to go, because if genocide is hysterical, if it's hysterical to call it a genocide, then what happens when people start disappearing? Like, where we're at is not, we're not in the stages of a genocide that a person might recognize if they learned about death camps and the Holocaust, obviously. But we are at a stage where the groundwork is being laid. And especially in the United States, one of the things I'll be talking about tomorrow with Emily is the degree to which human rights depend on where you live in the United States. Because you can have one set of rights in one state and hop over the border, and all of a sudden your very existence can be radically different in another state. And this becomes very easy to excuse because we have this narrative of states' rights. And the United States is a big country, but it's not beyond the pale for a person to be able to expect that their existence be respected from one end of the country to the other.
And B, externalizes any responsibility we may have as trans people by making us look like victims that can only be freed of oppression in the if the rest of society acts on our behalf. In order for me to believe that there would be a trans genocide happening, I think I would need to see a more streamlined anti-trans narrative. I think right now we have too much of a mixture of like some progressive-ish people that might be
The concept of a streamlined narrative is, I think, a accident of history. If you look back, particularly, let's just take, for example, the persecution of the Jews prior to the start of open killings in Germany in the 30s. There really isn't a streamlined narrative. Bigotry is kind of throwing anything at the wall and seeing what sticks. Another example would be the American Civil War and Confederate soldiers who believed in this concept of servile insurrection. Not all of them did, but enough did, and it was one of those throw something at the wall to see what sticks. The justification of hatred is not something that has to make logical sense. And sometimes we do a disservice in the creation of a historical narrative in making it make sense. Like, there's a certain amount of smoothing out of any argument you'll make in a historical paper that makes things appear to be a lot more simple than they might actually turn out to be. And like half the time being in history is kind of going, no, it's not quite as simple as it is. And that's it's going to become my common refrain on this channel for sure. Because we tell stories and we don't necessarily build those stories for complexity. The role of ideology intensifies such that the disappearances are excused and so on. Yes, exactly.
Critical or whatever they call them. And I think I would need to see more polarization as well. So you're either with trans people.
So 2 years ago, a group of people stormed the United States Capitol. That would mark the highest degree of political polarization in this country since the Civil War. I do think that all of these things flow into one another, and I think you will find a fairly significant overlap between the people who think the 2020 election is stolen and the people who think that trans people are groomers. It doesn't matter. We could go look that up, actually. Maybe. We'll go on later, but let's keep going.
Or you're against them, and that's it. There would not be any room for nuance or anything whatsoever. Those are two things that I would need to see in order for me to consider us closer to a genocide.
Well, you've got quite the list of requirements there. Ideally, if we have a situation anywhere where there is a genocide, we want to act before we get to a point where we recognize it as a genocide based on historical narratives. When there are death squads roaming around, it's too late. When there are camps opening up, it's too late. This is an issue that we need desperately to get out in front of.
All right. And let's go with Rose Malay.
Hey, so first of all, I just Googled the word genocide, and the first thing that came up was the deliberate killing of a large group of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. Obviously, there's going to be some people who argue that it's in the steps or in the phases, but even if that were true, I think it's bad optically, but I'll get to that. First of all, I think that if you are trying to say that a genocide is happening, that would imply that the Republicans or whoever the transphobic bigots of the society are trying to murder us. And I believe that even if Nick Fuentes or the most extreme alt-right person you can think of, J.K. Rowling, like anyone gets power, they're not going to want to lock us in camps and murder us all. Like, obviously, they're trying to take our rights away. These transphobic bills are...
Okay. The problem is that you have only a single conception of genocide. I don't think that works.
Are absolutely a terrible thing that's happening. But I feel like when you use the term genocide to describe what's going on, you're losing touch with reality. And like I said, you're going to take any random normie, any random person on the street, and when they hear you say that, they're just going to ignore everything else you're saying. They're going to be like, oh, I can discard this. When there's actually real things going on. There's real transphobic bills being passed that we need to focus on. And I think it's a big problem. But when you frame it like this, no one's going to pay attention. And so that's what I worry about when it comes to this. And please get me wrong. If there was a real genocide, I would be the first.
Okay, that is essentially the same argument as the power bottom politics made. One of the concepts that I talk about a lot is that you do not necessarily know the moment that fascism comes. People imagine something like the Nuremberg rallies, where you have this huge group of people all acting the same and doing the same thing. And that's not the case. Jackboots hitting the pavement are well into the cycle of fascism. Authoritarian governments don't open up with their worst option because they want to get people on board.
First person to be against it. I'd be the first person to advocate for it, because if there was a genocide, then I'd be going in there too, and I don't want that. I just don't think that is a thing that's happening. And if you can convince me that it is, then that's great. I just personally don't think so.
All right, let's go with. Do you prefer to go by Brother Malcolm or Sergeant Peppers or?
Goddammit, Malcolm is all of my social media. I just like to confuse people.
Your turn.
Wonderful. I'm Goddammit Malcolm. I'm a trans guy. I stream trans stuff from like a trans masculine perspective because there's like 3 of us. So I try and capitalize on that and use my minority oppression points to capitalize on that market. I think as far as trans genocide is concerned, I think that it's a little bit more like muddy than a yes or no answer to a question. I think that there are certain criteria of the 10 stages of genocide that are applicable in certain states. And I think that there are some that are not necessarily in chronological order. Like, for example.
Okay, that's fair. This list kind of looks like a point A to point B, particularly when you do this. And I don't necessarily think that that's the case. The systems that a state needs to engage in genocide exist regardless of whether a state is engaging in genocide or not. They can land almost anywhere on here at a given time, particularly when you consider the patchwork of how American political life is put together. So it can be fair to say that this particular flow chart does not necessarily represent a totally accurate view of what's happening.
Example, if I'm looking at this list, I don't think that we really hit the idea of symbolization because, like, yeah, we kind of identify ourselves with, trans symbolism, but I don't think that the government is like, hey, we're going to stamp, a little trans flag on your passport. So, we know that you're trans. I guess you could argue
I can get that one later. I just want to say we'll talk about that later.
Shut the fuck up. No, I'm just kidding. the only thing that I can think of that can be like comparable to that would be like an X on a gender marker, like a passport or anything like that. But that's opt-in, so I think that gets a little bit hairy. I think overall there's probably like 5 out of 10 that I would accept that would be classified as happening, but only in certain states. I'm pretty careful when I use the term genocide.
Yeah, Pippa, genocide is kind of a build it your own, some assembly required kit. I mean, it has to be put together, therefore. It is needed for evil to triumph as good men to do nothing. Well, sort of.
Because it is really
There's a larger point about that, but that's for another day.
Holocaust-esque, and it invokes like a certain level of severity and seriousness that I don't think that we've quite approached yet, but I think that if unchecked, we will rapidly approach and probably approach and cross that.
So this kind of gets into what I was saying before. Once the death squads are roaming, you're too late. And the other thing I would point out is there is such a significantly small population of trans people that any serious organized effort to cause harm to that community can be devastating in a very short amount of time.
That threshold a lot sooner than we think, and that's it.
Nice. And last but not least, Sonia.
Hello. So I think that it could be argued that there is a genocide going on in certain states. There are enough qualifiers to say that, and in certain red states in particular, as well as in England. But overall, I would say it's something that there's still a lot of, you could split a lot of hairs on it, and there isn't enough information to really put it in a definitive, it is a genocide in a way that would be convincing to a large number of people. And one of the problems that I find with this discourse that's currently going on is it is effectively trying to hinge everything.
Ms. Malcolm is on a red herring. Symbolization is not totally necessary. Closing versus IG, chosen name versus birth name. I think there is a degree of symbolism, particularly in how exact schools are trying to force students to go by their dead names. Well, so Innuendo Studios gets into this, Grammar Kami. Kind of how the alt-right works in a functional way when they choose targets is they will pick the most recent expansion of rights and push back against that. So to a certain extent, I think there is a sense on some of the alt-right that, for example, gay marriage is a lost battle for the moment, but trans rights is still something that they can push back on. So they're going to push back on trans rights until they stuff that back in the can, and then they're going to start in on gay marriage again, and so on and so forth. And I forget exactly which video it is. It's part of his series, The Alt-Right Playbook. It's a very good. Some of the sections are pretty long, but it's a very good introduction to the whole Gamergate into alt-right into Charlottesville system.
On the semantics of whether or not we should use one particular word to describe what's going on with us. And it's being used or utilized or weaponized as sort of like a political foil to say who is a good person and who is a bad person. If you agree that it's a genocide, you're a good person. If you don't agree that it's a genocide, you're a bad person. And the problem with that is as Malcolm stated, it's lacking in any kind of
Yeah, there's a new episode out not too long ago. I think like a month. This last 3 months have kind of smashed together.
And Rose stated, it's lacking in any kind of nuance, and it is creating this sort of unnecessary division. A lot of the people who don't agree that this is a genocide that's going on do agree that all of these conditions that we're facing are extremely atrocious and need to be addressed immediately. So it doesn't mean anything about whether or not your views are correct if you disagree with the word genocide to describe this. And so that's sort of the position I'm taking, is that really it doesn't matter what we call it. What matters is whether or not we can call out these individual issues that we're facing.
Well, Cal, that's much easier said than done. There are a lot of historical reasons that marginalized groups don't necessarily get along. What time is it? Let's take a short break before we continue. I'm going to take this dog out, and I will be back in about 5-10 minutes. All right, I am back.
and get attention on them and focus addressing those issues. And I'd like to also remind everybody here that there's none of us here have the ability to authoritatively state correctly that it is a genocide. Like, there's no way for us to effectively do that authoritatively. It's all layperson versus layperson here.
What is your criteria for authoritatively being able to describe the conditions in which you are living? Like, who gets to say, yes, I am been hit in the face, or yes, I haven't been hit in the face? And I suppose there's a certain point that no one has described any academic credentials that might lead me to think that they have studied this in any serious fashion. Do you know how many trans people are on the panel? Only if some have said they are, and I'm not going to necessarily try to guess, because I will almost certainly be wrong. There are a significant number of trans people on the panel, however, I do not necessarily think there are a significant number of genocide academics. For example, Hetman is a genocide academic.
So everybody here has just as much authority as the other person. And so that's why I think it's really important to focus on the issues and not sit there and try to decide, okay, are we using the correct word to describe this situation?
The word bundles the issues. It does not necessarily distract from the examination of those issues. Some of these research stream that no one else prepares for these things. Well, we do prepare for things, I'm afraid. Sadly, it has resulted so far in this.
Based.
Denying. Oh, sorry.
Will, you're
Sorry,
muted,
I
bud.
can't hear you. Will.
Muted.
Sorry about that. Hey, Denying. Do you have your answers to the questions open?
And I guess I could run through it if you want me to.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna have Denying chime in here too. So Denying is kind of like my co-moderator, but I'm kind of curious what his take is on it because he does a lot of research on genocide. He has, I mean, I don't actually need to describe your title. Why don't you just say it for us?
Hi, I go by Denying History. You guys can call me Brennan or Denying, either one shorthand for you guys. I do a lot of like research into mostly genocide denial or forms of negationism of genocides. My background is I have a PhD, for example, in East European history, so I did a little bit of research into the Holocaust and other genocides like the Holodomor that existed in that period.
Holy crap, it's an actual professor, theoretically. Let's see.
But like, kind of, I guess to answer the question is a lot of whether or not something is genocide or is not genocide depends on whether or not you're employing a legal or sociological definition. For example, it has its origins with the legal background, with Lemkin proposing it back in 1943 and being published in 44. And then also from then on, it became the legal definition that exists now.
The Lemkin document is something Sunday gave me, and I have been going over. I have stopped this in favor of preparing for tomorrow's stream, which should be fun if you don't want to go to Sunday's stream. Scheduling against Sunday, as in my channel, is probably silly at this point, but we did it anyway.
Now in 48 with the UN definition, and then we now see sociological definitions that have been proposed, ranging from anywhere between genocide means total killing of everyone of a specific social group or social category as membership is defined, or it could be anything from, say, biological destruction through preventing births or cultural destruction of groups. So we should probably be like mostly focusing on coming to some like agreement in terms of like what type of genocide's going on first, and come to consensus on that type of rhetoric before like we'd say if there is or is not a trans genocide.
So your objective here was to gather 8 people and decide a debate which has existed for close to now 80, 90 years.
That's how it works. Okay, so do you just want me to lay out my case?
Yeah.
Okay, so my case on this basically is that, so I think that it's really important to acknowledge that, like, you know, for example, as Denying just said, like there are some people who define genocide as like the total and complete eradication of a group. If that's our definition, no one has ever even attempted no one has successfully done that. Like, I don't think. Maybe you could consider the destruction of the Neanderthals like a genocide because we managed to successfully get all of them out of here except.
Archaeology is not my forte, but it actually probably was. And my understanding of archaeology is kind of surface level. But there's significant evidence to show that, for example, our concept of the uncanny valley was a reaction in response to Neanderthals. And this kind of that's wrong, kill it mentality is where that comes from. Which I think is kind of neat. Because you'll see those memes online about people who say, what does the uncanny valley actually suggest? And they're like, it's some kind of high strangeness thing, which is fun, but not necessarily rigorous. The panelist Lux, top center, is the only one to categorically say yes, the trans genocide is occurring. Thus far, yes. Everyone else is kind of, if they've gotten near the issue, they've kind of circled it a bit. I think that actually is not terribly uncommon. It's a fairly natural position to settle on, deciding that terrible things are not happening in your time.
In the case of like a sort of interbreeding with them. So I think that that's a really high bar. And so I think, again, I usually appeal to the UN definition. It's fairly conservative definition, and it includes specific language about
the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. This is what we will be discussing in some detail this coming month, along with Lemkin himself. The following acts shall be punishable: genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, complicity to commit genocide. This is a measure of international law. Article 2 is really the heart of what most people talk about, though. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of that group, causing seriously bodily or mental harm to members of that group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction in whole or in part, causing seriously bodily or mentally harm to the group. The problem that we have here is twofold. The first problem I see in the Article 2 is that the Article 2 sets out in very clear terms exactly to whom this crime may be applied to, categorically, national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups. It does not make allowances for further categories unimagined at the time of the creation of this treaty. The crimes themselves are fairly comprehensive. For example, we know stories right now that Russia is transferring Ukrainian children out of occupied areas and putting them on holiday in Russia. That is almost absolutely surely a genocidal act. There's also the killing, which happens in war to begin with. And I think the principal problem, and my principal argument thus far as I have constituted this research, is that this is our flaw. It's too limiting. It categorically allows for no real way out. The other point I would think that we have to look at is Lemkin in his 43 text focuses intensely on national groups. this first category, because he is using the Nazis' framework of genocide to explain genocide. We heavily associate this concept of the Holocaust with what genocide is. And we have left out traditional examples that might be more readily discussed as atypical examples. For example, the Holodomor in Ukraine was a forced starvation of Ukrainian peasantry by the Soviet Union. This is arguably genocide. However, in the discussion prior to setting up the show notes that Hetman and I were having concerning this episode for January, he's like, I don't really want to cover the Holodomor as a genocide because it invites controversy inside Ukrainian academic fields. And I'm like, okay, but that's kind of what we're here to do. So I get starting here. I do not necessarily think that this is a good ending point, though. This leaves an awful lot of wiggle room for horrible things to happen.
About attempts to reduce membership of the group. Like, just because we are spontaneously emergent in the sense that gay people and trans people, like, there's not an identifiable genetic component to it or whatever, like, we're going to continue to happen in the world, like, still attempts to reduce numbers in the group. If you know that mental health outcomes are better when you allow people to have medical care, and you try on purpose to restrict that, including adults. Like, I don't know if anybody has been paying attention this week. Pre-filings have been happening all over the country where up to the age of 21, up to the age of 26, like, there are limitations on the rights of adults to seek gender affirming care. And I think even if just looking at the fact of how that shit happens, sorry, I'm going to curse sometimes. It's just casual, part of my language. If you just look at that, those are materially things that are attempting to restrict numbers in the group. And some people will say, well, you need to have intent. Be a genocide, there needs to be an intent. Well, I think that's pretty easy to demonstrate as well, because if you explicitly have the position that, like, oh, we should watch and wait with these teenagers, because if they get to the age of 18, if we just have them go through puberty, maybe this is just a phase. Maybe it will resolve. Maybe they will just be cis. You're kind of explicitly stating that your goal is for that.
So, in my mind, I do not see a problem with allowing people to explore their professed identity to whatever degree they want. This is a discussion I have had. Not a lot of people are going to be comfortable with that, and I get why. However, you can be uncomfortable with the concept and your place in the world without necessarily denying the personhood or their ability to access care that they think is critical. I guess what I'm trying to say is I would come out strongly in favor of LGBTQ and trans rights in particular, as they are currently under assault group, strongly each time. Even if I don't confess to fully understand what's going on, I will run along behind you and try my best to help. Just tell me where to go.
Person to not be trans. And if that's your policy position, then your goal is for fewer people to be trans. And I think that is it's an exterminationist position at the very minimum. I understand that people have, like, their definitional quibbles about the word genocide specifically. Like, it is exterminationist policies. They are deliberately trying to reduce the number of people existing within the groups. And I guess I just want to really quick, because goddammit, Malcolm mentioned it, like, I'm able to demonstrate all of the 10 stages of genocide, but with the symbolism thing, like, if you prevent people from being able to do puberty blockers, you're making it so that they can't pass. You're making it so that they're marked as trans permanently forever, like, with tens of thousands of dollars to repair the damage. And some of that's not even fixable. Like, certain bone structures are not fixable. birth certificates, like restrictions on changing birth certificates are another thing. But like that's kind of my broad basis there.
That's a broader point, I think, for us is that we can cause an extreme amount of medical damage by limiting people's access to care, and whether it's something like gender affirming care or women's reproductive care, or the damage is done. Like it's here now, this second. It's in the past. It's been happening. Kind of at a point where I'm not sure that quibbling over the thing matters. Yes, absolutely. I again, the word I don't know is great. That's not really my specialty. I would very much need someone to come and explain that to me if they were willing. I don't particularly like the word in case of a person in any event. That would be fixable. But yes, it is much safer to exist as a trans person if you pass.
Alexander, I know that
Can I
you're
go
smarter
after
than that.
Malcolm?
There's no way.
I want to go
Can I go
Malcolm,
after
and then I have a
Malcolm?
question. Let's do Malcolm, and then I actually have a question for Johnny Scarlet, and then you can go next, Rose.
And I'd like to go after PB.
Let's go.
Oh, I'm okay.
Wait, did I skip you, PB? I'm sorry.
You did, yes.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go Malcolm, PB, Johnny Scarlet, Rose, Sonia.
Okay. As far as the
I'll be right back.
symbolization is concerned, like symbolization is like when there is a symbol that is used to identify this group outside of other people. If you accept that symbolization means that, which it literally does, you can't say that just not going on puberty blockers is symbolic enough to demonstrate like atypical phenotypical features that are associated with male or femaleness to be that discerning symbol. It would have to be something like a trans flag that was stamped on our IDs. We would have to have something that would denote that our assigned sex at birth was this, that, or the other thing. It's
They
something
have
that
attempted that.
They have, but it hasn't been passed, and that's a big part of it, right? If everything like fizzled up to a little dud in Nazi,
It has been attempted. It is being attempted. It's probably going to be done through a backdoor method eventually. In particular, the symbolism of the Star of David being worn by Jews in Nazi Germany, or the triangles by homosexuals in Nazi Germany, is become a political minefield. Like no one is going to outright propose that, because that has a connotation that very quickly takes us from to this is a genocide.
Germany, we wouldn't say that the Jews were genocided if nothing happened. But the thing is and I wanted to specify this as well, because you keep bringing up bills that have been proposed. I agree that all of the...
My first question to this entire panel, maybe sans the professor, is when do you think the Holocaust really began? Because I would argue that the Holocaust functionally begins in 1934, maybe late 1933. The first thing the Nazis do is the Nazis kill the Nazis they don't like. The second thing they do is they start setting up their systems to carry out a genocide. And they start creating the legal precedents required to make it palatable to the population at large.
These bills are bad, and they're definitely something to raise an eyebrow at and say, this is pretty fucked up. If this passes, this will have serious extermination undertones, like you said. But the principle that they're not being passed in...
The very proposal of bills that represent a threat to a group is bad. Like, a healthy society would not necessarily be considering the eradication of anyone in any context.
Most states is why it's important to focus on, one, where they are located, right? So in red states, this is going to be a lot more like relevant and true versus like blue states like California or Washington, where it's like, yeah, maybe some crazy dude proposed a bill that we should put like, you know, brand the transgender symbol right here on every single trans person.
Okay. The crazy dudes who can propose bills are elected officials. That's a problem.
We can say that that's alarmist. It is, but to say that it's on the same level as something that's being passed like in Indiana or Florida or anything like that is just, it's bonkers. I'm going to dogpile my side a little bit because I feel like we're going to dogpile Luxander really hard. So I'm going to put on my other hat really quick and just say that from our side, our side, quote unquote, excuse me, I'm so sorry, from the side of people that are like wanting to be a little bit more cautious with rhetoric, I don't disagree that there is like genocidal like predilections to this, but I try to be really careful and couch my language pretty significantly. Something that makes that really hard is when we have people that are like so stupid that they literally had to fucking Google genocide like the second that this panel started to even have a position on if there's a genocide or a genocide not happening. That's embarrassing, and I don't want to be ideologically grouped in with people that are that misinformed on this issue or that uninformed on this issue.
Okay. I'm going to have a problem with that in general. At any point in your life that you don't know a thing and you feel the need to make a quick primer, Google's your friend. It's not necessarily the end of knowledge. In fact, it's almost never the end of knowledge. But orienting yourself in a space, particularly in the context of academic work, is going to require you to have a working understanding of the issues at play. We talk about the Holocaust, for example, in American history courses in high school. We do not really talk about the mechanics of the Holocaust. We do not really talk about the mechanics of genocide, which is a problem. You're also not going to get in the mechanics of genocide in history classes at the undergrad level. The bare minimum of the mechanical situation is going to be graduate level classes, which you'll probably take in a history program in your junior and senior year. Those typically squish together. You will not get involved in that, though, unless you're specializing in history. Hey, Bubba, go lay down. Go. Ugh. Meh. What are you eating? No. Come here. Be a good boy. Come on. Yeah. Puppy time. You're not going to get involved in that unless you're specializing. So it's going to be a case of it's not beyond the pale for people not to have a working functional definition of what genocide is. The very idea of society is to try to put bad things from our minds. So that's probably not a great way to engage with people.
And then I'm also going to come for you, Johnny. Don't think that you're safe up there. In your opening statement, you said that it's impossible to genocide trans people because there will be future generations. Can you give me an example of a genocide that is not legitimate in your opinion, where there was no genocide because there were future generations of those people? Like, do you think the Jews weren't completely genocided, or they weren't genocided at all because Jews can be ethnically Jewish or religiously Jewish? Or could you explain that to me? Because that didn't make any fucking sense.
You know, I had not thought of it from the ethnically or religiously Jewish perspective. I think that's very interesting. However, I am saying that we are going to continue to be born into future generations. And in the essence of cultural genocide, were that to happen, I think that those future generations would be prevented from coming out, prevented from having a trans or queer culture. Is the word queer?
But how is genocide not happening then? Like, shoving everyone in the closet is functionally the same thing. Like, it doesn't have to be a camp. That's culturally damaging.
Queer okay here?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Please do.
Sweet. Okay. Preventing from having a queer culture, I think a
more apt description would be genocide as a process. It's also a very fluid process. Like, you can design a lot of different ways to reach an outcome that's devastating to a community. I mean,
that is more of the issue that would be really specific to this particular situation.
For sure. I'm not going to cut anybody off, but it sounds like you're conflating like extinction of like a group of people versus genocide, and those aren't really like equal. But sorry, I'm done now. I'm done
Alright,
being
Power
mean.
Bottom,
Sorry.
go.
I was just Lux. I was mainly going to ask you, and sorry, this is my first panel ever, so I've forgotten some of your points. But one thing that
Wait, this is your first panel, and you were commenting on the nature of panels to start with. Okay.
stuck out to me that you said was about the medical discrimination. I'll definitely agree that the medical discrimination for trans people can be like a little bit worrying. Like,
well, that gets into the problem, Pippa, is people have this very... Okay, you need to get down again. There you go. Is have this very rigid definition of what comprises a genocide. And that doesn't work functionally, because genocide... One of the key problems I have noticed is that this treaty here carries with it a responsibility to act. So there's this desire to avoid calling things a genocide that has filtered through our political ecosystem. For example, Darfur, we took great pains to avoid openly calling it a genocide, so that we did not have to take action to alleviate the problem. And that's a problem. It's now a problem that's especially apparent because here we are having a discussion about whether or not this thing is happening while the wolves are gathering at the door.
Malcolm said, like some of the fact that a lot of the bills have not passed is definitely like a little hope. As far as some of the I guess more deep.
Like if you sit and you read some of these laws, they're totally incoherent. There's no way to actually enforce these laws. The attitude behind them, though, is clear. And the attitude behind them is a problem. Like it creates for us a problem because people will try to enforce unenforceable laws.
Details and stuff. I know that Black people have also complained about medical discrimination at some points. What distinguishes trans people's discrimination in the medical field from other groups of people that have maybe been facing?
Okay. Tune in for tomorrow because this is almost certainly going to come up with Emily. Nothing is going to distinguish those two. As a matter of fact, the design and I could sit and talk about the medical system for quite some time, being a frequent user of it with kidney disease, but there really is no... Whether the system exists and allows for people to do things or not is largely a corporatization of medical care in this country, because you have insurance companies that can dictate the treatments that people receive. You have doctors who do not necessarily have the experience base to understand what different needs a different patient might have. I mean, you find this all the time where women have a much harder time getting access to pain management than men do. There really isn't any distinguish. Well, there is a certain amount of surgical precision that trans healthcare is being targeted with. The problem that African Americans have faced historically is downstream consequences of racist policies rather than openly designed. This is institutionally designed to cause destruction. Trans issues, that is, trans healthcare denial.
This kind of discrimination for a while. What makes us genocidal versus what makes us potential for genocide versus not them?
Lux, answer in 1 minute, okay? And then I want to move on.
This is really important. You can't just have it for a minute.
My answer to that is the United States is actively engaged in genocide of multiple different groups of people. Black people in particular, if you want me to just adjust that group specifically, there are, I think, just consistent.
Exactly, Pippa. There is a huge amount of performative action happening in state houses and the House of Representatives, particularly, as we just saw for the last 3 days. It's a huge amount of performative action that does not necessarily translate into policy. There is the degree to which you can shape debate by simply speaking something into existence. Almost certainly, Grammar Kami, it's uncomfortable, but we're going to get really uncomfortable on this channel. The degree to which you can change debate by speaking something into existence is terrifying. Just I picked up the book, like I was talking about, Myth America, which is edited by Kevin Cruz, and the other historian escapes me. And it's a set of essays about the United States and common political myths that are rooted in history. The very first one opens up with this concept of American exceptionalism, and it talks about how the red term is originally an artifact of Stalin not being particularly fond of the answer that the American communists gave of the Comintern, and how a generation later, Newt Gingrich pulls the word out, dusts it off, and uses it as a rallying cry, completely absent of its original context. There is a, particularly because the right wing exists in this media ecosystem where they can push out things in huge numbers in multiple platforms all along the line, you can see a massive ability to control conversation in the United States that does not necessarily exist in the past. Mass communication has become fraught.
Consistent policy attempts to reduce, like, it's not just literally reducing the numbers of their groups. Also, is another part of the definition that I want to highlight, is that it's also just creating conditions that are unlivable. So, like, if you create conditions where they're forced to commit crimes in order to survive because they're underemployed, like because there aren't any, like, whatever, like, it's a number of different facets. Black people have gone into this in depth or whatever, but like, I think that it's clear, if you like using the same like itinerary like definition that I use for genocide for trans people, yeah, the United States actively is trying to suppress the number of Black people, or at least suppress like their quality of life to such a degree that they don't have opportunities and they're never able to like.
So that was probably a trap, designed to get her out in front of looking unreasonable. Let's see what happens.
Grow out. Like, I think that there is a certain amount of like deliberate policy population control toward them, like,
right,
and
but
Native Americans, like both.
You would need to have some intent in there, right? Though, because like you can pass laws that systemically discriminate against somebody without the intent of like trying to eradicate them. It might be like a byproduct of something, right? So you would have to like be able to ascribe intent to the like reducing of the number of Black.
This panel is not equipped to explore this question.
People in this country as well, right?
I mean, do you need it caught on tape, or is like enough decades of consistent policy enough proof that like that there is like drive behind those things?
I think for the
like, why are they doing it?
I think for the current day, you would definitely need to see some intent. Obviously, systemic discrimination could come from historical standpoints, in which case, like, I could see your point in that. But again, like, I mean, a big part of genocide is the intent part. So in order to call it a genocide versus just systemic discrimination, you would have to tell me what is different between how trans people are being medically discriminated against versus Black people. Or if you want to call them both genocide without intent.
Alrighty. Johnny.
Okay, so here's the problem. We have placed a burden of proof down here. I think you could probably take either one of these threads and run with it and have a very fruitful discussion. I don't think you're equipped to bounce between the two of them. There is there's a framing that I have seen occur, particularly among people who are involved in reproductive justice, and I have them somewhere because they were recommended to me, books that talk about the effect of pro-choice laws anti-choice laws as creating conditions that depopulate minorities. I don't know if we can say, because it's exactly what happened, I don't know if they're equipped for this. Will certainly is not equipped for this because he's kind of just sitting there presiding over a set of statements. He could not be here and it would make no difference.
Hey, Scarlett, I would like you to go. This was Malcolm kind of brought it up, kind of stole my thunder here, but I kind of want you to go more in depth on this idea of we aren't genocidable. Can you go more in depth on that, and then I'll have Rose Malay and Zonia after.
The idea that we haven't existed for pretty much the entirety of modern humans is not supported. We've obviously seen other cultures and parts of the world have an amount of trans people or gender nonconformity for a very long time. However, I would say that it's been happening. It's been a thing in Western culture pretty much the entire time the West has existed that we.
Okay, so yes, but it has been relegated to the background at best and the shadows at worst, which is the entire point of being in the closet in the first place. So, for example, Shakespeare was probably bisexual. However, he didn't come out and say it. And in today's day and age, he almost certainly would. And that, I think, makes a huge difference. He did not feel that he could exist in that way openly in his time, which I think marks something of an improvement, that people feel the ability to be out, that they have communities to rally around. So the question becomes one of a degree of existence. What existence are you willing to accept? I don't think anyone should be forced to accept a life in which they are hiding portions of themselves in order to exist in society. And that's kind of what she's suggesting would be fine. At least maybe, I don't think she thinks that. I think she's not necessarily working through the end result of what happens if this continues.
We have been put under some sort of suppression. And so to compare that to what's happening right now, which is a much quicker, more intentional form of suppression, I think is, which I think it was intentional before, but I think it was like the echoes of other older societies. So I think that we will continue to be born is pretty much, it is what it sounds like. We'll continue to be born, whether or not we're able to have a queer culture, whether or not we're able to come out and to exist as we are.
But that doesn't necessarily, that does not necessarily preclude or include, rather, existing in a way that people would find acceptable. Like, forgive me, but isn't one of the principal problems that LGBTQ youth have is that they do not feel safe in existing openly? And the whole point of the It Gets Better project. Like, you might exist, but what kind of existence is that?
That's the question.
Rose Malay.
All right, well, thank you. First of all, I want to address what Malcolm said. I mentioned that definition because it's what the vast majority of people hear when they use the word genocide, and that was a quick way of expressing that, but okay. I'm not a fan of the personal attacks. I think we're having a nice, productive conversation here. I think, first of all, I want to also address, I think, what Lux said about the hormone law being passed, like not letting kids transition. I want to say this because, like, I transitioned at 14 years old, right? For trans women especially, it's important to transition at those ages, and I'm living proof that those are good things. That being said, I still think it's dishonest to call that a genocide. something can be bad without us using extreme buzzwords to try to exaggerate an action that we disagree with. These laws don't have genocidal intent. In their eyes, they think they're protecting children from what they see as irreversible harm. Now,
No. Protecting the youth is a very common feature of genocidal rhetoric. Very common.
obviously, they're wrong, and those bans will only lead to trans people being hurt, but it doesn't mean that they want to like get rid of us or say trans people. I'm sure there's some people out there who don't like trans people, but they don't want to see us being killed, right? And
Language about pedophiles and grooming of young children has intensified a movement reminiscent of campaigns dating to 1970s that teach to turn trans people into a political wedge. Let's see if they'll actually let me read this. See, death threats from our family member. And she goes for fair power. She's someone that wonders she would do if someone came in shooting. Proud Boys and others, extremist group, many of them armed, converged outside a planned drag event. Neo-Nazis protest another event. I had a full panic attack and breakdown. Mrs. Cabell, clinical instructor. So, this killing of 5 people. One thing we know is extremists hate on the internet and seeing in the abstract, I can kind of compartmentalize. All right, have a good one, Grammar Kami. Intimidation and violence against great. Heavily extremist inflammation. Since far-right began attacking the Boston's Children's Hospital over summer providing care for trans, has reportedly received bomb threats. What is a bomb if not death? Like, I don't know. You don't drop bombs on people for happy reasons. Like, here, have this bomb. Surprise! All right, have a good one, Grammar Kami. 12 times as many anti-G have been documented this year as in 2020. 12 times. Multipliers are scary to begin with, and 12 times is not a small number to multiply by. Trans youth being... So there is very clear cut case of harm happening.
And also, I watched Lux's video a few weeks ago. Now, it's not fresh in my mind. Something about like the 10 short steps to trans extermination. And I remember seeing 2 of those steps and thinking like, wait a second. Okay, that's kind of a reach. I don't think we're quite there. I think it was 5 and 7, but I could be wrong about that. But yeah, that's what I'm gonna.
Surely, going on a panel and not knowing what you're talking about, or being conversant with the position of someone you're arguing against, is probably a great plan. Well done, Will. You clearly assembled the best and brightest for this.
Stop.
All right, Zonia.
Yeah, so there were a few things I want to touch on, but we've kind of moved past them. So instead, what I'm going to focus on is bring up something that I would like to see if we could kind of all address a bit and talk about.
Hey, Connor.
One of the things that I think is important to take note of is that the vast majority of these anti-trans bills do not pass. And I think that's a really important sign because it's right now we're in the spotlight. So we're a very popular.
Let's take a look, shall we? Legislative tracker, anti-transgender. This is exactly what I was looking for. Anti-transgender. Here we go. An error occurred while retrieving bills. An error occurred retrieving map assets. That's not helpful. Let's try again, shall we? Well, that's not useful at all. They did earlier in the stream. They kind of glossed over it when we talked about the 10 stages of violence. Texas's attempts to gather a list of trans people. Just because something doesn't succeed does not mean it's not a problem. There's also a concept I think I want to get at is creating. There's a concept we use in military analysis and military history all the time called setting conditions. We are setting conditions to win this battle, or we're setting conditions to effect a retreat, or we're setting conditions. Setting conditions is when you are doing the necessary groundwork to create an outcome. And so here's the crux of my argument. We are definitely in a stage where you can say, without a doubt, that we are setting conditions for a genocide of trans people. And my argument is that if we are in the condition we are setting conditions, you are already engaged in the battle. You are doing the work of combat. You are working towards the objective. At that point, you are no longer theoretical. It is no longer just a question of, well, maybe, maybe not. You are now engaged. You are steps away from being committed. It's a concept that will come up a lot in our series on military science. But like you have to have a firm idea of what you are doing and what you want to do in order to start setting conditions.
Subject right now, and we are starting to actualize our independence and our rights, which is really important. This is something that was also experienced in the years leading up to the civil rights, or during the civil rights movement. There was a backlash as well. And what you found was that the backlash was because of the fact that people were actualizing their rights and their independence. And that's sort of a good sign in many ways that we're out there.
There's an interesting parallel here that I think is not being grasped. And it doesn't come up a lot because we have whitewashed the civil rights movement. A lot of people used very aggressive methods to actualize those rights for African Americans. Malcolm X, for example. Even a lot of the methods that Martin Luther King used was not seen favorably by the community at large, mostly the white community. This is overlooked now because we've turned King into a kindly figure who doesn't see color. But Martin Luther King had a very, very defined role for, or defined understanding of people's place in society and how they have to get around that. And there was this discussion of, well, are sit-ins appropriate? And you see this discussion come up in the wake of nearly any riot that's attributed to BLM is, are their methods appropriate? And that's a part of a larger discussion on the alt-right, I think, because there is some shenanigans going on there, especially in 2020. But people, or another great example is Colin Kaepernick, is people said his methods aren't appropriate. It's not the right time to point this out. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, is you're getting into, well, it's not right to point it out in this regard because I don't think it's that thing. And if it was that thing, it seems really inconvenient to point it out because that makes people think that you're being hysterical. And I don't think that's a great way to look at it because you're not. You're raising an alarm before the hammer falls. And that's really important.
We're being noticed for being out there. We're being noticed for actualizing our rights and our independence. And there's some pushback. The pendulum swing is trying to swing back on us. But guess what? Overall, at least here in the US, we are winning, even in the red states. So the vast majority of those bills do not pass. Some of these really bad ones have passed, unfortunately, particularly in Texas and Florida. And there's more aggressive bills being drafted at the moment as we speak. But overall, there's been significant progress and it continues moving in a positive direction. So that's a really important thing to recognize. And I think that we should talk about that more and we should basically capitalize on that momentum. And if we instead ignore that momentum and start saying that, there's a genocide against us.
The two are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, in order for someone to desire to commit a genocide, they have to see the group that they want to genocide on as on the rise. And the two are not mutually exclusive.
We're almost like dismissing the positive and dismissing the momentum and dismissing our ability to capitalize on that momentum. And that's something I think we could do a lot of good with. Does anybody else agree with that?
You know, I think that actually
Yeah.
boils into kind of our next question a little bit. Like, do we think that calling the trans genocide, or do we think that like calling the systemic discrimination that everybody's facing a genocide, do we think that's helpful for passing pro-trans legislation or changing the sentiment?
I don't think you can just move on from that. Yeah, the Weimar Republic is kind of a complicated subject, and I think it'd be worthwhile for us to do a deep dive on that. I don't think you can just walk away from that point, because what she's saying is that everything is hunky-dory, basically, because we're moving forward. I don't think that's the case. And like I said, I don't think they're mutually exclusive points, that progress can be being made while pushback is happening. In order to have pushback in the first place, you have to have progress.
I don't think
However, there's the problem with this panel coming out right now. Will is just moving on. He's not investigating the thing. He just wants to put out. This would be better served as a press conference. Just have a bunch of people get together, read off some statements, and be done. We certainly would be done here faster.
so.
No.
I think overall it would.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think overall it would just turn into a semantical debate again, and there would not be a lot of productivity there. I think it's actually way easier in a way, or not easier, but more.
Semantical debate is going to happen regardless of what you do. So you should not try to avoid the debate. You should position yourself to win the debate. Or you should more accurately, in the case of politics, you should position yourself so that debate does not matter.
Productive to focus on the individual issues, the individual instances of oppression that we have to deal with. I think if we focus on those, we can more effectively tackle those. If we try hinging everything on the word genocide, that doesn't really describe anything specific to address. It doesn't describe things to.
I don't agree at all. A genocide is a thing that is very easy to address. You stop the genocide. Like, the methodology can change, and we will be talking about that. Maybe not this month. Might be a future episode, but we will certainly be talking about what you can do, both legislatively, militarily, and on a more municipal level, to avoid these situations in the first place. Will just wants to be vindicated. That's what the panel went through. Saying that after Roe got overturned in some law. Yes.
To call out and to take action on. And that's more important than trying.
The entire point of focusing on legislation has a fatal flaw at the moment. The courts, particularly the Supreme Court, can pick up whatever cases it wants. And they do not feel bound or contained to have an interpretation of the law that makes any sense. They absolutely will move through and engage with things however the Heritage Foundation wants them to, and however what's that group? Progress and discrimination. I feel this with the UK situation. We're behind the US with regard to trans healthcare access, but also the UK anti-trans program. I think the reason that anti-trans propaganda is less overt in the UK, and I spent a considerable amount of time watching and being horrified by Philosophy Tube's latest video. Not that her content itself was bad, but the message she had just felt crushing to me. I think the reason it's less overt is because they have been much more successful at creating mechanisms of control.
trying to win this battle of one word. And I don't think that word is, I don't think we're going to have much traction in trying to fight over.
The problem you were having is that you think that the battle has to be won. Look at how Republicans act. Republicans have turned around and turned this 87,000 IRS agents thing into a battle that they don't care who wins or who loses. A great deal of energy and time has been spent explaining that this is 80,000 agents hired over 10 years to replace a retiring and aging workforce in order to supplement the IRS's capability to do the job assigned to it by Congress. But again and again and again and again, you see right-wing figures simply implying that 87,000 agents are going to be hired instantly and armed and sent out into the public to take away your stuff. It's not true. We know it's not true. But they just say it anyway. You don't have to win the argument if you are loud enough and have a platform with which to speak. You simply have to speak it into existence and keep running.
For that word, I don't think it's going to get us the momentum that we think we're going to get. And I think we already have a lot of momentum that we can take advantage of. And trying to split hairs on one word is just going to dilute that momentum if we don't focus our energy on that momentum.
Brother Malcolm.
I honestly don't really know like how I feel about this question or like the answer to it. I think that Zonia is right in part, like the idea that it's going to create like a kind of sprout off debate, more so than focusing on the actual issue like at hand. And something that I worry about with the language of genocide, like I kind of said a little bit earlier, is it's very Holocaust-esque. And I feel like that invokes such a very specific reaction in people. And if that reaction isn't reflected in their perception of what's really happening, it's kind of like, oh, they're just full of shit, and then they walk away and they don't care. And it kind of turns out into like a boy who cried wolf kind of situation, you know, where if it does get to the point where they do have like our little summer vacation camps that are going to be not very fun, it's like, well, yeah, but you guys said it was genocide when they just said that they.
What kind of statement is that?
Didn't want to, allow, puberty blockers for people under 13. Like, it's not really a genocide now. It's just summer camp, guys. Like, calm down. I think that can be an issue. Like, I'm kind of looking right down the middle, and I see like the utility of saying like using alarmist rhetoric can help kind of that back push, like that quote unquote blue wave that might help damper a lot of this legislation. But I don't think genocide is the word that's going to do that. I think it's only going to cause like the boy who cried wolf syndrome, and then just the way that it invokes such a.
Wow. It would be hard to stick a position more out in the middle. That's buck wild.
Very specific type of crime. I don't think that most people are going to really resonate with that, and I don't think it's going to do really what we want it to, but yeah.
Rosemary.
Oh, I didn't have much to say. I just don't think they're ever really going to put us in camps. I think if they ever did, I think even like the most extreme conservatives would kind of question. They'd be like, okay, that's a bit weird. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's probably correct. Like I said, no one is going to propose something that actively looks like the Holocaust. They're going to go about it in different ways. The codification of stochastic terrorism is going to really be where this comes into play, because it's a great weapon as far as the political extreme right is concerned, because they can aim it anywhere they want. Right now, it's being aimed at LGBTQ people. It can be aimed at African Americans. It can be aimed at Chinese Americans. It can be aimed at Asian Americans. It can keep just going on and on and on. Like, it's very easy to point because you have that attitude and the downstream effects of that. Like, what I think is really the danger here is not camps. I think the danger is something more along the lines of creating an environment where people simply try to legislate the ability to be trans away. out of a concept of keeping the peace. And this serves the same purpose. Like, it doesn't stem the tide of people committing suicide. It doesn't stem any deaths. It causes the same set of circumstances that lead to a functional cultural genocide. And a cultural genocide is genocide. Like, cultural just kind of qualifies it, probably in a non-helpful way.
All right. Power bottom politics.
I think the transgenocide discourse. First of all, I don't know how. I don't go outside a whole lot. I go to work and I come home. I don't know how big that discourse is in, like, you know, actual trans activist spaces where they're actually doing stuff, you know, where they're like pushing against legislation and stuff. I don't know how many of them actually buy into this idea. So
Then why are you here?
I know that it's more of like an online thing in the first place. So I don't know if right now the impact of this discourse is even that.
Okay, for funsies. I'm going to send a message to my friend Lilith. Who is not. We will see the result of this later, I suspect, because I don't imagine she's awake now. Maybe listen to who, dirt person? Sorry. Let's keep going.
Severe, but I will say that it is a bit frustrating that there's such a rift happening where it's like, I guess in some way I just see it as like a bit of a waste of time, where it's like, you know, any of our energy that we could be putting towards proving that it is a genocide, we could be putting towards preventing it from getting past stage 4, if we are even at stage 4. You know what I mean? We don't need to be necessarily talking about it. I know that's ironic coming from me, who's on a panel about this, but I think in general, our energies would be better used focusing on preventing it from getting any worse than it possibly already is, with the amount of hateful language and that kind of stuff coming from conservative pundits when it comes to trans people. I just think that we should be spending more of our time talking about solutions and less of our time talking about tone policing people and trying to get them to admit that it's a genocide exactly, so some people can feel better about like the situation. I don't know. That's just how I feel about it personally.
I don't like the word tone policing. It gets into the particular problem that the left has with communication. And when they land on this tone policing thing, it's not tone policing. We are attempting to qualify what is happening in the real world. We're using a toolbox which is probably imperfect, but it's still the only toolbox we have for it. Luxander has stated openly, Connor, that she thinks it's a trans genocide. Anyone else is either anti about the issue, or dancing around it. There is a historian on the panel, Denying History, who focuses on genocide denial. He should probably be speaking more.
Luxander.
So the question is using the word genocide rhetorically effective for changing the law? Is that the question?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not necessarily like clinging to the idea that the word genocide is like the most rhetorically effective thing for changing the law. Like the word literally just does definitionally apply. And like, so to me, when I say something's is like a genocidal intent or whatever, like I'm not necessarily doing that in order to be rhetorically inflammatory. like if the shoe fits, like I'm sorry if it makes you feel bad, but that is what's happening. Like if you like a question that I guess I would like to a couple questions.
So here's a problem I'm having with the panel. We're trying not to be polite professionals over here on this channel, Dirt Person. The problem I'm having with this panel is this cries out to talk about specifics, and they're not talking about specifics. Like, and I get why it's a lot, and bringing that in would not fit the format. Well, that's entirely possible too, Pippa. I get why they're not doing it, but this kind of is like, take a anti-trans bill, look at it, examine this, and then now we have a basis of comparison. We can start reaching back to other examples throughout history. Like, we have a really effective way because we have the Nuremberg laws. We can look at them. Like, we can look at them and we can go, I spelled that wrong. No, I meant this. We have them. We can look at them over. They're here. So we can take it and we can compare these things.
Questions that I would like to put to the panel, since this seems to be kind of the sticking points that I'm kind of finding here, is like, first of all, how can we demonstrate intent? If you say that there is not sufficient evidence for intent, then I would like you to describe to me how we suss out.
Nobody on this panel is a lawyer.
Intent. And also, is there a different word to describe policy attempts to reduce numbers of a group and create conditions of life which are unlivable for them, which cause suicides, which cause significant worse mental health outcomes? If you would prefer to use the term exterminationalist policy, I think that I could be convinced by that argument. If you just think that the average person is just going to be turned off by the word genocide, but frankly, like, if the definition, like, again, if you just look at the more conservative definitions of intent to reduce numbers in a group, actions taken to reduce numbers in the group, and looking at the material effect that they have, like, I don't necessarily think that the laws overall not passing is an indication that things are not bad. Do you know that in Texas and in Florida, when they restricted access to trans kids having medical care, they went outside the legal system of the democratic legal system? They used executive powers to declare that this was not effective medical care. Like, this is fascism. They don't care about going through the routine ways of doing this. They're going to do it however, regardless of the effect. So that's my answer.
You mind if I cut in on that real quick?
So
Lux, you said that you admitted that you weren't sure that it was the most rhetorically effective word for getting support to pass laws, right? So the whole reason why we would want to use a certain word to invoke alarm would be for effectiveness of gaining support for pushing things in a positive direction, right? So does that matter to you? Do you care about the effectiveness of rallying support to push against anti-trans legislation? And
yeah, I have no clue to how conversant everyone is on the issues at large. Sterilization is going to play a factor in tomorrow's discussion too.
Anti-trans executive power.
Which is why I would say that there is genocidal actions happening in minority communities outside of trans people.
So I don't think that legislation that is certainly a concern, and perhaps amongst primary concerns, but it's certainly not my only concern. Like, I think that because of the way that the legal system has been stolen from any real democratic input, I think it's very clear if you look at the gerrymandering across this country, the stacking of courts, there's no real, I don't really think that there is a way to fight legally against this. Like, yes, continue voting for sure. Keep doing that. be, contact your legislators. I contacted my senator this week when I realized that my home state passed or has introduced pre-filed a law restricting access to trans care for kids or up to the age of 25 or 21. That's still important, but like, frankly, like we just need more people aware of what's happening. And like, the things that you've said, I don't disagree that there could be, I guess, better rhetorical ways.
So here's the thing, as a rhetorical strategy, if I want to grab your attention, I need to have some kind of attention grabber. I mean, that sounds tautological, but you get what I'm saying. I need to be able to go boom and bring you in, and I have seconds to do that. One of the stats that I've seen thrown around for creators is you have 5 seconds to get someone's attention on a short before they move on, which is mind-boggling to me, because if I start a short, I usually watch it all the way through unless it's incredibly stupid. But 5 seconds to get someone's attention. Like, people are primed to not have a very big attention span. So I think genocide is actually a really effective term in this regard, because that's 5 seconds right there. Boom. The person who is going to investigate this claim is already predisposed to dig deeper. The person who isn't is just going to move on to begin with.
Is of going about this, but like, if you think that despite the fact that the definition of genocide is being like word applies, which I just happen to think that it does, like it's just a matter of fact to me. I could.
Chat, do you mind if I speed this up? Will that bother you any? Because otherwise we'll be here all night. If no one says anything, I'm just going to go on.
See myself adapting politically for the purpose of, like, if on the ground people will get on our side more and they won't like turn off their brains or something, I could be persuaded on that. I just think that the word literally applies.
So my problem with that argument, though, is that, okay, so there's a couple things here. Like, you want to have a word that invokes alarm, an appropriate level of alarm, to get attention on something. So that attention matters. The whole point is to get attention on the issues and find some way to address them. And you're saying that there's no way to affect the anti-trans legislation and anti-trans executive power, right? At least within the system. But in some way, you want to draw attention to this. Now, I firmly disagree with you. I think we still have a lot of democratic process that still works, especially like here where I am in California.
Okay. Sort of, kind of. We have a kind of skewed vision of democracy here in America. We definitely see the problems that gerrymandering creates, but even if we got rid of the overt gerrymandering, I don't necessarily think you're going to perfect democracy. So that is kind of fair. However, I think the population size problem comes up again here. Advocacy requires a tidal wave of people. You have to get a lot of people involved. You don't have that tidal wave if it's just you, regardless of what you're advocating for. You have to get people moving, and hyperbole works really well for that. So even if you think it's hyperbole, this is a starting point for discussion, not necessarily the end.
Yeah, we absolutely have had a very positive swing as for pro-LGBTQ rights in California. Our democratic process does seem to be pretty strong here. And we have Republican representatives in the state who have failed to try to find ways to circumvent that, to push anti-trans legislation. So we've actually been in a very positive swing direction for a long time now. So, I would disagree with you on that, but sure. But so I would disagree with you on that. But what I would want to say, what I would want to ask you is, like, what is the point? Like, how do you rally support right? Especially if you're trying to pick words that are highly divisive, that would cause a lot of people whose ancestors or even recent within living memory relatives suffered what are globally recognized as genocides. A lot of people would shear off from supporting that word being applied to us. Half of my family would be of that lot. So how do you, like, you want to rally support or at least get observation of these issues and raise alarm? How do you do that? Like, what is your method of doing that? Like, do you get what I'm asking? Like, you seem to want to do that for some kind of reason, but you want to use a word that maybe you personally think fits the definition, but a lot of people would disagree with you, and that would be a sticking point for them on whether or not they recognize the level of alarm that you want them to recognize because of that word. So how do you get that support when you're using such a divisive word?
I would first like to say that I really don't think that Republicans in your great state of California feel very well represented. I have seen them talking about it. I, as a Democrat in Kansas, am not very well represented, and that might be a reason why so many people like you and I go to California. So I don't really.
Fair. I might have to have a talk with her. She seems pretty well engaged.
I really think that California is a great representation of like the success of democracy. If you like people who think that the word genocidal is divisive, like what's my way of dealing with the fact that that's rhetorically supposedly ineffective? I demonstrated it. I could make the same video that I made a couple months ago, like Rose referenced. I made a video going over the 10 stages of genocide as represented by Gregory H. Stanton's research, and I have more examples of all of the stages. Like, and
I mean,
like,
to be
So
one of
okay,
your
hold on,
examples
hold
of
on.
civilization was pretty much just Steve Crowder doing a stereotype. That's not the same thing as like Jews wearing like stars of David on their shirts. You know, like, I mean, there's some things that could probably be said about that video. Sorry.
can I respond to that directly really quickly?
sure.
So
You were breaking up a little bit.
Lux, 30 seconds, and then I want to go on to Johnny and a couple other people in the panel.
Speaking of the
Yeah,
symbolism
sure.
thing, like,
My bad.
No,
you're good. So there are multiple ways that symbolism applies here. Not only making it impossible for people to pass because they're restricted from puberty blockers, but making it so that they have to sterilize themselves in order to change their birth certificate. Like,
There we go. It's up. Was it third person? Yeah, that was third person.
the fact that you have to produce your birth certificate for certain things and the fact that you will be marked as trans because you can't change it, or you have to sterilize yourself, like, that's two different aspects of genocide right there. Like, that's marking you and reducing like potential membership in the groups through sterilization, like through policy.
Oh, that's so different.
President Sunday had a really good point in his stream with Joe. I was watching that yesterday. He kind of talked about how our legal system creates, even in unintentional ways, the conditions necessary for genocide, because it does not necessarily recognize groups organically. And that might not be the way he wants to put it, but that's the way we're going to put it here. And that's kind of what Luxander's driving at here, I think, is we aren't equipped for policy-wise for this yet, and people are pushing back against that. And if it was just a question of not being equipped for it and not yet having caught up with the times, I would be a lot more hesitant to say that this is genocidal. But it isn't. It's a case of we aren't equipped for the times. We aren't equipped for the way that people are engaging with themselves in the world. And we have people who are pushing back against that and trying to present these people who are simply trying to exist in a manner consistent with their identity as threats. And that's all the hallmarks of the necessary pieces you need to commit a genocide.
That's so different.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think you can tell
Just because
you
it's
can take somebody's
indirect.
natural appearance in a certain way. I don't think you can take somebody's natural appearance in a certain way, like, and then call that symbolization. Black people are not symbolized just because they're skin colored.
If you made a policy that they had to be,
Except what is a colored's only a water fountain but a symbolic separation and a physical separation, and it's very, very symbolized in the Jim Crow South and even in the North.
a
The same
certain
thing
darkness
as
or something though,
ascribing
like,
an image to
No,
it's
somebody.
so-
It's not the
it's
same
so
thing.
apples and
It's not the
oranges.
same thing as ascribing an actual, like, it's not the same thing as ascribing like an actual symbol to somebody. You know what I mean?
The self-optic in is like the most important part, because you could say that like the
Mhm.
Jewish people in Nazi Germany like were subjected to the symbolization law because they went to synagogues, or because they said I am Jewish when they asked what faith do you practice, right? Or what are you ethnically? Oh, I'm Jewish. But they're self-select.
No, absolutely not. The Nazis in the Nuremberg laws, or the Nuremberg codes, had a strict definition of who was Jewish, and it was generational.
for that. That is worlds apart from somebody saying, this is your symbol, you have to wear it so I can identify you. Those are two totally different things. They're not even the same.
This panel's not conversant with the history that they need to be able to have this discussion. And you sitting down here not bringing up this is... There's no code of ethics for historians, but there should be.
And again, just because they didn't pass doesn't mean that there haven't been laws introduced introducing the concept that you can change the gender on your ID, on your birth certificate, but you can change your sex. Like attempts are genocide. Like that is what it is.
Not genocide. No.
Right, so Johnny Scarlet is going
Attempts
to
are
go
not the
for,
same thing as successfully passing a law.
Johnny Scarlet gets like 4 minutes if she wants, and then we're going to do Rose Malay, and then we'll do Malcolm, and then we'll do Power Bottom Politics, and then we'll move on to a different question.
Cool. I'm bad at interrupting people, so I I do agree with Zonia and PB on this idea that we are ramping up in positive representation, and we do need to capitalize on that. This is personally, while there aren't really a lot of
Still a separate issue.
LGBT centers in my area in South Louisiana, my advocacy has always been exist as I am as a non-binary trans person, and change the people in my life to understand me and to want to vote in the favor of people like me. The positive for us.
The solitary qualified panelist is apparently existing solely as a moderator, and almost certainly just sitting there with their mouth agape. I hope their mouth is agape. My mouth would be agape if I didn't have my camera on.
As a group, and this is going to sound really preachy, but we have to let the positive affect us in a way that shows, in a way that lets us live our lives in a semi-normal way. We have a lot of evidence on this panel, and I think that Lux has made a really compelling argument for the stages of genocide applying to certain states in America. However, I don't necessarily think that this is going to pass in a way with all of the positive representation that's going on. I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope that this is going to be something that is a swing in the direction of we are reacting. Like all of this negative attention, all of this negative legislative attention is very reactionary. And I have a lot of hope that in the coming decades, this will swing back the other way and swing into a good middle ground wherein we are within acceptability and we have.
What is a middle ground? Like we're at the middle ground at best. What? You may recognize someone's existence and allow them to exist, or you don't. There's not really a middle ground. It's something of a binary state. You don't sort of let people exist. Sort of letting people exist is the exact same thing as not letting them exist.
The ability to not necessarily have to cling to something like the word genocide in order to make our statements known. Yeah, that's pretty much what I got right now.
Rose Malay.
All right, well, so first of all, when it comes to not letting trans people change their birth certificates or something like that, to what you said.
Yes, Connor. Only a little bit of genocide. Can we have a little genocide? It's that Mitchell and Webb sketch. Can we kill the poor? Did you try killing the poor to sort out the economy? I didn't say we're actually going to kill the poor. Jesus.
These are laws that I feel like are outdated, and I think that they should be changed. But this was like something that was like the case long time ago. I don't think you can really make the argument that this is something new or something that refers to like symbols and stuff. Nothing that I really heard from that feels like symbols to me. I mean, the transphobic hate symbol, like the pink triangle, like in Nazi Germany and stuff, that was like a thing. But I don't see people like flying symbols about their hatred for trans people. So I mean, maybe it does exist. I just haven't seen it. But when it comes to the current state of trans issues, I think we're in this really weird place. It's obviously true that there are more.
Okay, so what do I call a person who posts on social media that there are only two genders? And that you can't switch between them? Like, how is that? How is that not symbolically bad? How is that not trying to pace somebody? How is that not a battle cry against trans and LGBTQ rights?
More pro-trans people now than there have been at any other point in history. And I think that's a great thing. We'll see that go up over time. Just due to the pure exposure of people knowing that we exist and having positive experiences. But at the same time, there's also never been more anti-trans people than there are right now. I've seen it. You know, I transitioned back in 2014, and it was just a bunch of people who didn't know what it was, kind of thought it was a bit weird, but they didn't care. They didn't revolve their lives around it. You didn't see people on the media talking about it. They moved on with their lives. So, I mean, there's good and bads to it. I think we're just in a weird part of culture. I think we're going to get past this. I think it's going to be more positive over time. But with this exposure and people finding out what being trans actually is, you're having a bunch of people who really don't like the idea and are spreading hate towards it. And I think the propaganda is a problem. So that's just my opinion about the state we're in currently.
Rose Malay, really quickly before we move on, what propaganda are you talking about?
When it comes to propaganda, I mean, like, for instance, like people, like mostly on the right, but people in general kind of saying like trans people are like invading your bathrooms. They're coming after your children. They're essentially trying to make us seem like we're predators or something like that. Or this whole idea that it's like a social contagion of being trans. I mean, there's just so many things I've just heard over the years of trans people being a threat. And this is why this is a huge issue that you need to care about.
social contagion and a threat. It's like you're almost there. You're almost there. And this, this would not happen if people were more conversant with the details of how you set conditions for genocide, because this is literally setting the conditions for genocide. You don't present someone as a threat because you're not going to try to stop them. You don't, rhetorically, you present someone as a threat because you want to create cause to get them, to stop them, to make them no longer be a threat.
Why we need to stop these trans people from getting their rights because it's dangerous for society or something like that. I mean, other people could probably explain it better. But yeah.
Malcolm.
So I think I'm just kind of like reiterating what I said earlier. I think something that's important for me anyway to be mindful of when we're talking about like the escalating trend of trans people being targeted by legislation or or being targeted by discrimination, et cetera, is that genocide is such a loaded fucking word. It's like if you are talking to a vegan and they say, well, the animal holocaust is happening right now, your brain literally just turns off. It powers down completely. You don't hear anything else they have to say because you're like, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my entire fucking life. It's definitely not like.
Well, since did, I certainly would.
The Holocaust, even if they could make a pretty good argument that maybe it is similar to the Holocaust. It's such a trigger word. It is such a buzzword. Like comparing anything to slavery, the Holocaust, genocide, anything like that, it's just an immediate L. And I think that part of the issue that we're having is
okay. That is not necessarily going to invalidate the concept that those things are occurring.
I think that it was Zonia that brought it up, is that dying on the semantics hill is kind of what's killing this conversation in the water, I think. Not just on this panel, like, but literally, like, if we're talking about the kind of...
If you're on a hill, how are you dying in the water? I'm sorry. That was not necessary, but I had to.
Legislation that we're seeing, the snowballing effect of like anti-trans sentiment in the U.S., specifically in red states. A lot of it is like what it's funneling down to is like us arguing with each other about is genocide an appropriate word. And so I like that Luxander is willing to fall on the sword and say like, well, I would accept like other definitions that are also extremist or also alarmist because I think that this demands a certain level of alarm, which I agree with to an extent in red states. But I think that dying on the hill of genocide is so fucking stupid and it's the last thing that we should be doing right now.
I didn't know if you expected me to jump in, Will.
No, what I'm trying to think about is just okay.
Will is thinking. It looks like it hurts.
Okay, here's a good question for the panel. What do we think is the most effective praxis for passing pro-trans legislation?
Actually doing shit. Sorry.
Local direct action, baby. Let's go.
Yeah.
This is not a good way to take this. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
I'm really curious.
Yeah, both a combination of direct action as well as like just grassroots. There's a lot of attention we can bring to a lot of these bills that come up. There are multiple websites, but there's one in particular that I follow that will let you know about when there is anti-trans legislation that has been proposed, that's being looked at, right? That's being drafted.
Ashley's? That's Ashley's, isn't it?
Wait, can you link that?
And you can go through, I'll link it at the end of the panel, I'll pop it into our group chat. But yeah, you can look at that, you can draw attention to it. I've actually covered it on my streams multiple times before. You can get people in those states to take action. There are LGBTQ organizations like here where I live, we've got an LGBTQ organization here in my town. And when these kinds of things come up, they are looking for people to help bring the word out, to get attention to it, to spread it around, share it on social media, share it to your relatives that are in the state, share it around, and as well as to go and protest these things, to call up the legislators and say, I'm one of your constituents, do not vote for this bill, or vice versa when it comes to pro LGBTQ and pro trans bills. And that kind of stuff actually does have the ability to affect change. So I think that's a really important thing to do, is to get that kind of attention on. Even though a lot of our politicians or representatives are corrupt, the reality is if their constituents are angry with them and call them up and fill up their emails and such, they will cave to the constituents eventually. So that's a really important thing to do, is to make sure that the people know what the representatives are doing and are aware of it. And you can also kind of circumvent the anti-trans propaganda that comes along with those bills, because there's a lot of money circulating that are paying for ads and such to fearmonger about trans people and to help bolster support for these anti-trans bills. So the more that we mobilize and take action and let people know about what's going on with these bills and talk to people about it and encourage them to go and act on it, the more we can push back against that machine that's trying to fearmonger about us as well.
Malcolm.
Yes, put that on Discord, and if you could send it to me, please, so I could stick it on the Two Guys Talking History Discord too.
I think that like local direct action, and helping individual trans people is going to be probably the most beneficial, like in our little community of trans people, right? So making sure that people have access to hormones, to medical intervention, stuff like that. If somebody's in a state where they're considering banning this, maybe like start troubleshooting with them, put them in contact with people that can help them either leave the state or get access to this kind of stuff while they're in that state, kind of flying under the radar. I think that would be one. Something that I think is important, and this is just me, obviously, from my perspective. I think that humanizing ourselves to people that don't like us is something that's really powerful as well. As somebody who has like a ton of conservative family who grew up with very conservative people, like incredibly conservative people, something that goes a really long way in kind of reaching across the aisle and getting even like the most hardcore conservative people to kind of humanize and see trans people as not like this, hypothetical boogeyman that's waiting in the bathroom to attack their wives and children. It's just kind of humanizing yourself with these people and making sure that like in real life you're building these connections. It's pretty hard to do.
Okay. I have feelings here. Yes, that can be very effective. But it's only effective to a point. Who are you humanizing yourself to? Do they have the necessary clout to position themselves in a place to take action? I think it's... Thank you, dear person. I think it's very difficult to look at and launch yeah, I saw, thank you. I think it's very difficult to look at and say, no, you shouldn't try to immunize yourself to your family. You shouldn't try to change your mind. You should. It is absolutely essential to your personal mental health, and it's absolutely essential to your personal safety. Because we've seen plenty of cases where it just can become tragic if you are not accepted by your family. But that does not create the advocacy necessary to target change in any kind of meaningful way on any kind of time scale that we need. Let's continue.
You online, when all we do is like cuss each other out and tell each other to unalive each other in video games, and it's very heated, it's very spicy, it's very toxic. But in real life, if you're able to build those bridges, those connections are invaluable, and that is how you change people's minds and opinions and perspectives on trans people in America. And I'm not saying just like go to like a Klan rally and be like, "What's up, guys? I'm trans and I'm actually pretty cool." Like I'm not saying that. I'm saying like in your local communities, in your local, if you go to the bar and there's like some dude in a Trump hat and you strike up a conversation, he's just sitting there and it's like, "Oh, by the way, I'm trans." He's like, "What? I didn't see you fuck a single kid in this bar, and you're trans? You're kidding? No way. That's awesome. I had no idea that there were no kid fucking trans people." You would be amazed at how bad people's perceptions are of trans people. And doing that and humanizing yourself is so important. I would say that that's probably one of the most important things in my opinion.
Okay, let's move on, please. I'm glad I marked this as not for kids.
Hey, so obviously, I think we need more awareness about anti-trans laws and to get people to care. But one thing that I think is really important, like we just need those positive media examples. I mean, if you really think about this, the vast majority.
How do you create trans awareness? If only there was some kind of attention-grabbing thing you could do.
Of people, I forget the percentage, but it was a study some years ago. The vast majority of people don't know any trans people in their life. And if they did, the chances are they'd much be more likely to accept them because it's humanizing. That's someone you know. That's someone you care about. This isn't just some boogeyman on the media. This is like real people we're talking about here. So when most people see trans people, they just see what they see in the media. And what do they see? They see a bunch of crazy.
Absolutely, Connor. That just makes you one of the good ones most of the time. And you will definitely see this if you work in any kind of racist community where racism is acceptable. They will make a distinction. I used to work for a time in auto parts as a delivery driver starting off and then a parts manager. I used to drive around to all these shops and I would be conversant with the people who worked there because I was delivering parts and figuring out what they needed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a couple of them who would mark out horribly racist positions and talk about it openly because they thought I was one of them. And it was always tricky to deal with that in a working environment, but besides the point. There are people who mark out these horribly racist positions because they think you're one of them, and then they would establish that there are good people of a given race and bad people of a given race and blah, 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 blah. People who want to be bigoted or who want to keep to a particular impression they have of the world will take incredible mental gymnastics to stay there. Coming out of that is a process. It's not an easy process. It requires you to accept that you do not understand the world in the way you thought you did. And that's a big deal for a lot of people. It's also much more likely to make a person quiet than it is to make them an advocate for you. Trans people. perhaps.
Crazy people on Twitter saying all this wacky stuff about, I don't want to say specifically, but like extreme stuff that to the average person is kind of crazy, and they don't take us seriously for that. I think we have a huge problem with some of the most famous people online when it comes to trans people are people like Christian or Jessica and Eve, and there's a tons of people who see people like that and they think that every trans person is like that.
Who are those people? I would say someone like Abigail Thorne, Natalie Wynn. Those two come to mind almost immediately. I don't know a whole lot of I can't think, who are those people? And how are they a problem?
Obviously, that's not the case, because there's people who want to take those people and make it seem like that is the image of trans people. They want to make that the image of trans people because they don't like us. So they need to see that trans people are just normal. They need to see people who are just the gender that they are, and that's all they are, and are just essentially women, men.
There is a movie, and I've watched part of it, called Jeffrey, about a gay man living through the height of the AIDS epidemic. And Patrick Stewart's actually in it, which is why I got turned on to this movie in the first place, because I'm a big Star Trek fan. Patrick Stewart's in the movie, and he is part of a gay couple. And one of the lines that he says that sticks out to me, and this reminds me of that, is he's like, I think we should be in an ad for Middle America, because then everyone would say, oh, look at us, it's a wholesome gay couple. That's kind of where we're at right now. I get it, but I don't necessarily think that's going to have the effect that everyone hopes it will.
I think that that's really the issue. Once you see people like that representing trans people, I think a lot of people are going to be like, oh, yeah, I see that.
Powerbomb.
Will, I hope you don't mind me asking, could you repeat the question? I'm ADHD as fuck and I lost complete train of thought.
No, totally. What do you think are some effective ways that we could pass pro-trans legislation or just increase pro-trans sentiment? Like what? Because clearly what I'm hearing from the panel, right, is that discussing whether or not there's a genocide or not is not really effective at doing what we want to actually have happen.
You stacked the panel. Like how would you consider that authoritative?
So, yeah, I'm just curious, like, what do you guys think are some good options that we could do instead of maybe getting so fixated on these goofy words, right?
Yeah, I thank you. I would definitely argue that local action is definitely like one of the best ways to increase change. One thing that always comes to my mind when I think about that answer, though, is like why aren't people more active right now? And I feel like if we're going to take the discussion in that direction, we might need to have answers for that, which personally I don't really. I think some people might say social media, other people might say like, oh, it's Gen Z and it's just the way it is. I don't know. I think local action and working on the state level is really, really beneficial for the reason that I just mentioned, and also because people like me, we often don't have a whole lot of time to go out and do extra stuff and extra activism. I think that those are like things that we need to consider when we say that local action is the best route to go.
Well, I was going to go out and stop the genocide today, but I simply didn't have time.
I still think it is. I also agree with the aspect of humanizing yourself, for people who might not disagree. This is one reason why I think we should really take
yes, you good boy.
advantage of the fact that this discourse is really as polarized as it could be. There are still plenty of libertarians or moderate conservatives who will nitpick the issue of children transitioning, something which I disagree with them on, but they will respect you as an adult, as a trans person to a certain extent. Like there is more of a gradient on that matter right now than like there could be. Like I guess if you get what I'm saying, like it could be way more black and white for a lot of people right now. The fact that people are more willing to have their minds opened up and they're more willing to talk to like some trans people and stuff, I think that's something that we should definitely capitalize on and kind of reach out of our personal bubbles or our personal echo chambers to try and reach new audiences and new people to have those discussions, whether online or in real life. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
I think that's fine. Alexander.
Okay.
I mean, like, I really appreciate the fact that there is a growing number of people who support trans people. Like, that's great. The material reality is that this country is ruled by a Christo-fascist minority, which has introduced a national Don't Say Gay bill that includes things like, we will take away funding from state hospitals.
We won't get into libertarians. I will rant for several hours.
That do gender affirming care, like literally like if this law passes, and who the fuck knows if it will. I mean, probably not with the veto. I guess they don't have the majority required. Like they're going to keep trying, and they're going to probably get a Republican president again relatively soon. Like I just don't know how to be effective legally speaking, and like I don't know anymore if that's like my primary concern.
I would hesitate to make any firm guesses about the political climate here in 2 years. mainly because the midterms did not turn out the way we expected. And the speaker race did not really change the tenor or tone of what the Republican Party is advancing. And if this message was not successful in the midterms, it probably is not going to be largely successful in a presidential election year where a lot more people are active in voting.
Concern, like changing people's minds and then they'll vote differently is maybe more where my concern lies. And like I don't think anybody necessarily like addressed this directly earlier. Like if you think the word genocide is too charged, like, but I can demonstrate that the state is enacting or at least attempting to enact policies, and not just attempting to enact policies, but not judiciously.
Her problem is that she is vastly outnumbered. Yeah, Ayn Rand is something else. Her problem, though, is that she's vastly outnumbered. Because she's on a stacked panel. And the one person who's probably seething at this, or at least I hope they're seething at it, has been utterly silent.
That's not the right word, but like going outside of the legislative process, using executive powers to enact their laws when the laws fail to pass through the legislative body. Like, I don't know that that's like the most worthy consideration for our time to be spending. Like, yeah, vote. Keep doing.
Saying that because it's okay that it's happening because the laws aren't passing is like, it's fine that someone is shooting at me because they're missing. Okay, but they might hit you.
That. Try it out. See if, like, I mean, we've been doing that for a while. I'm not sure that's working. I don't necessarily have like a full body of other ways that we should be going, but like I just am focused more on like we should be calling things as they are. Like I don't think that it benefits us to soften our language when the material reality is that these policies are going to result in deaths. Like it's just very clear.
Okay.
So there's a problem I see though.
Hold on, Johnny. I can't have Johnny Scarlett get cut out for like another 20 minutes like we did last time. So let's have Johnny go.
I agree with Johnny Scarlett that we should be positive as well. We can do both. I think we can do both, and I want to acknowledge. I really appreciate your point on that. We should be.
Thank you. That's what I said.
Acknowledging the strides that we've made, but I also think that this is a very scary time.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
That was all. I just want to say.
Me?
Yeah, just go ahead and I'll say my piece after.
Yeah, so I would say, like Lux, multiple people here have stated that like voting isn't what they're talking about. They're talking about direct action. They're talking about protesting, pushing back against legislators, calling legislators, harassing them to let them know, don't vote on this. And there's more than just voting. Like a lot of people, I think, kind of boil things down to voting, but voting only happens at certain intervals, right? Voting is like a fraction of the power that you have as a citizen of a democracy, right? There's so much more to it than voting. Voting is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction. So like what we're talking about here is we're talking about actually utilizing our voices, utilizing our bodies, taking action, pushing back, telling our representatives who are supposed to represent us, hey, fuck you, asshole, don't vote on this thing. You report to me, motherfucker. I pay your fucking bill, your tax. I pay taxes for your ass.
You must be a joy when police stop you.
I'm the one who puts money in your fucking pocket. I'm the one who puts food on your fucking table. You listen to me, motherfucker. Don't vote on this shit. Call them, harass them, email them, show up at their offices, fuck with their free time, fuck with their peace of mind. There's so much more that you can do than just voting. And so this whole thing of like boiling everything down to voting is like this ridiculous thing that both like, more sort of the, anti-establishment types do, as well as the pro-establishment types do. They're like, voting is so important. Yeah, voting is important, but voting is still a fraction of what you do when you are a member of a democracy. And so I think that's a really important thing to pay attention to and to call out. And I get that you're kind of signaling toward, well, the system is broken and it's authoritarian and we can't do much about it, so we need to go outside of the system without saying we need to go outside of the system. I get that. But I don't think that we're at the point where we need to basically just give up and admit failure of the system and say that there's no hope with it at all, and that we should never do anything within the system and we should just go exclusively outside the system. So I would hope that you would also agree that there is a mix of things that we can do within the system and along your road.
So you can do all these things that are very important about getting action to be taken, but you should not call it a genocide. You shouldn't engage with language that might describe what's happening, because it might make people not like you. Let us continue.
Outside the system, obviously, right? I would hope you would agree that there's a mix of that, right?
I was using vote as shorthand. Like I wanted to highlight that I myself just emailed my senator this week. Like I don't want to.
Yes,
I have 2 minutes to
that
respond or whatever. Like I'm using vote as a catch-all for operating within the system. Like I just don't see the current activities as being very.
Oh no, it's almost like this format's not conducive to discussing this issue.
Effective. it just doesn't seem like we're getting very far. Especially like it just seems like the conditions are worsening, and it's not just the political, like literally the laws. Like that's the other aspect of this that I don't think anybody has acknowledged so far is the stochastic terrorism aspect, where a bunch of gay and trans people like got shot in a nightclub very recently, and the response to that from the conservatives was a very resounding, "You deserved it, you fucking groomers." Like it's not just the laws when we're talking about genocidal intent toward our people. We're talking about on the ground deaths, people dying on the sidewalk because the Salvation Army wouldn't let them sleep with the women. Like this has been ongoing for years.
So I got two things to say real quick. I posted in the panel chat that there's a testimony of an organization that basically was able to get 130,000 letters sent, which I don't want to like waste time with the details, but basically they sent 130,000 comments to be submitted to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, condemning a proposal made by Donald Trump, reinterpreting the Affordable Care Act's non-discrimination provisions for trans people. This slowed down the rulemaking process, and on August 17, 2020, one day before the rule change was going in effect, a federal judge blocked the rule. So there is proof there, granted, with my research, this is the only link I was able to find. This is the only link I did find that shows that there is hope that you can create change within the system. Second of all, shoot, give me a second. I'm so sorry, Lex. You said something I was going to respond to, and it's currently slipping my mind, so I apologize about that. But I'll try and get to it when I remember. Sorry about that.
I'm gonna have Johnny Scarlett go.
Can we just get a quick confirmation though with Lux, because I felt like you kind of dodged that one. So you're saying the system has completely failed. There's no point in utilizing the system at all. All actions should be outside the system. Because I was asking if you agreed that there's a mix of those. Like there's plenty of things within the system that we can do to affect that change. But what you said at the end almost sounded like, even though yes, you contacted your representative, you almost basically said at the end it doesn't matter anyway because it doesn't affect anything. So I felt like you kind of dodged that one.
Sorry, I feel like I may have communicated very ineffectively because you've come away with the opposite of what I intended to convey, which is that like I don't think that you should stop voting or.
You're gonna come across the opposite of whatever you say. It's just what's going to happen. Everyone is against you here. You are outnumbered, but you're putting up a hell of a fight.
Contacting representatives or accosting them at diners. That's still that's like a good thing to do. I just also. Like I really like it, comparing our struggle to the civil rights struggle is like like realistically, how many years have Black people been trying to get like the government to stop killing their people on the street, Judge Dredd style, and yet it's still happening. Like how much observable history needs to continue in this system before we acknowledge that it isn't working? I just don't think that if truly the overall sentiment across our country is overwhelmingly trans positive or queer positive or whatever, like that's really not being reflected by our government. Do you think that the positive sentiment amongst the populace is being accurately reflected by our representatives?
I think a few legislations is enough. I don't think a few anti-trans legislations is enough to say that the entire.
How many laws need to be introduced before it's a problem?
Well, I think it depends.
Okay. What pro-trans laws have been introduced? Let's ask that question. Will you ask that question?
On your representatives, right? So
it's yes,
like here in California,
it's going to be state by state, almost every example.
So that's the problem. You can't say across the country. Now it's a mix. But anyway, sorry for interrupting you twice, Johnny. I really apologize. I just really want to confirm that one up.
It's okay. Something that I've been struggling with personally, and that I would like to do more advocacy for, is the fact that I've been trying to get on testosterone for approximately 2 years. I live in Louisiana. Most of my chatters know that, so not doxing myself or anything. But as far as I can tell, the sentiment in Louisiana is not widely political. It is something that has more to do with the attitude of actual healthcare providers. This is a real problem for me personally, because I don't just consider myself non-binary. I consider myself non-binary trans. I would like to transition into a more masculine body. And I would like to have more of a discourse with more healthcare providers and help them become more educated, not just about how to treat trans patients when and if they come up, but how to actually know that someone is serious about this and to take them seriously. I'm not entirely sure how to do that. This is something that it's a journey I'm going to be on for a little while now, and I have considered moving outside the state in order to rectify it for myself, but that doesn't change anything on the grassroots arena. And I want to echo Malcolm there, like the ability to actually change the real
that would absolutely be a worthwhile goal. The implementation, something like a decade and a half between getting something in front of a medical review paper and getting it accepted into common medical practice. That's not a small project.
Tangible lives of trans people and queer people is primarily grassroots. It involves how the ordinary people treat us, not just how our senators treat us.
What I'm curious about is if we use the term genocide does it really, at the end of the day, change our praxis? Because to me, I guess what I'm kind of hearing, I guess, from Luxander is that if we're in the state of a genocide, that means that there are different actions that maybe we can take versus if we're not in the middle of a genocide. Is that
I think
true?
it changes.
A significant portion of this conversation is going to be useless due to terms of service.
I don't think it changes a lot of praxis to use a specific word. If we're all of the opinion and of the experience that we are actually going through the inability to get healthcare and the inability to get mental health care, the actual pathway to changing that doesn't really, it's not affected by the semantics, in my opinion.
Like, if I say trans people are currently undergoing a genocide right now, does that, what actions am I allowed to take to now stop the trans genocide?
Yeah, do I finally get to shoot people now?
I'm curious.
As a matter of caution, we're going to skip ahead 5 seconds.
Level of urgency. I think in some states you could argue that we are, but I would not say that it's like a universal thing in America right now, at least.
So I know, like, what I would say, if sorry, I know I've been dominating the conversation. So okay, so this is what I would do if I felt that I could genuinely argue definitively that there's a genocide and that there was overall just, it was pretty obvious that there's a genocide going on. This is what I would do. I would be going to places like Human Rights Watch and I would be petitioning them and saying, look, we need people to speak out to other countries and to the UN about this genocide being enacted by the US against the trans population, because that's how the origin of the term genocide started. It was actually intended to be used as a goad against or toward other countries that are enacting or have enacted a genocide, to put pressure for countries or coalitions of countries to put pressure on another country who is genociding a people within its borders. And so the weight of that word motivates coalitions of countries to take that kind of action and put pressure on another country to say, for instance, because
no point has the UN ever considered taking unilateral action against the United States. Just a thought. And more to the point, what good would it do? Say you go to the UN and you stand in front of the Security Council and you go there and you say a genocide is being enacted in the United States, and everyone goes, yeah, you're absolutely right. Someone should make them knock that off. If the United States chooses not to, what are you going to do? The United States has an unimaginably large arsenal of weapons. They can easily repel anyone who wants to try to stop them from doing anything against their actions and applications of sovereignty. What good would that do? The model created by the convention does not necessarily imagine a situation in which superpowers can be reasonably challenged. Will's master plan was just to bait people with this panel. Will's master plan was probably just to sit back and not speak during this panel, which is working because TOS bait people with this panel, possibly. Will's master plan was to sit back and not talk, which works well for him because every time he talks, everyone hates him.
Human Rights Watch was petitioning the UN to get them to amend Article 2 to recognize what China is doing to the Uyghurs as a genocide. And so that's what these organizations do. They go and they petition the UN and other country coalitions, as well as individual countries, and petition them to say.
The reason they're doing that is because the terms are not necessarily positioned for action. More to the point, again, China is a nuclear power with an incredibly large military. If they don't want to be stopped, they're not going to be. The UN is not the avenue by which you can effectively do this. It has to be internal action. It has to be internally done.
We think that this is a genocide and that you should recognize it. Multiple countries stood up and recognized what China was doing as a genocide targeting the Uyghur people. The UN did not recognize it, but many other countries did. So that's what these organizations do, and that's what I would do if I felt that I could truly argue that it is definitively a genocide. I would be going and petitioning these human rights organizations to do presentations in other countries, before our country representatives and before country coalitions, to get various countries to recognize what the US is doing as a genocide targeting us. That's what I would do.
Let's have Powerbomb go. I'm curious if who else on the panel has an opinion. Everybody?
I see Rose raising her hand.
All right. Powerbomb go.
Yeah, I don't think the genocide rhetoric is very effective. I think we should also talk about how the government is able to restrict an individual's access to medical help is really scary, even for cis people. I don't think that you need to completely abandon the concerns regarding like medical discrimination for trans people. I think that this could possibly be a very effective narrative to get cis people on your side. You don't want the government overstepping boundaries, telling you what you can and can't do medically to your body. Ironically, that is a similar thing with the Roe v. Wade decision that happened recently. I think it's to get cis people on your side, especially because you need the majority of people on your side in order to like make any impactful change. You should probably mention that I think the government's boundaries when it comes to medical decisions should pretty much be to make sure that the doctor doesn't take advantage of you or kill you. If it doesn't actually negatively impact you in any way, and the doctor is not taking advantage of you in any way, I don't think that the government should have very much of a right to tell you what you can and can't do. The fact that they're trying to do that with some of this anti-trans legislation, I think would be a much more effective line of logic to try and get cis people on your side versus using alarmist rhetoric to try and get them to empathize with somebody that they probably don't even know or have never met in their life. If a genocide was happening right now, I would have very few boundaries regarding what to do about that. The thing that I'm always curious about, and I don't necessarily have an answer to this, is why aren't we doing anything about it? If there are people who think there's a genocide happening, and in situations where there have been genocides that have happened, why?
Okay, I'm not going to say much here because the answer is usually pretty self-evident. People don't do things because we have made the bar for genocide so high. We go out of our way to avoid describing things as genocide. Nations don't act in the interest of a random group of people. They act if their interests and that random group of people align.
Aren't people doing anything about it? And I feel like that would be a very interesting discussion to have as well.
I do want to pitch in on, I guess, like two aspects of this. Like the purpose of using the phrase genocide, or again, like if you want to back off of that specific word because of it's like people shutting down, like I think it's still important to acknowledge and drive home rhetorically that these policies are aimed at and have demonstrable intent toward reducing the number of trans people, and that they will hurt other groups. Like obviously, like the bathroom laws, like overwhelmingly trans women don't go into the bathroom unless they're pretty sure they're going to pass. Like, so the women who get hurt by that are generally going to be cis women who are like butch or older and have gone through menopause or whatever. Like using the alarmist rhetoric does change the proportion of the response. And I specifically think that that's important because in the ramp up toward a genocide, there is a tendency toward complacency. I've used this rhetoric multiple times. Like Jewish people were pulled out of their home.
You are right there, right here. Say something. Contextualize this discussion. What is the point of being a historian in the public space if you're not going to interact?
Homes because they still felt safe in their homes. And like I also want to acknowledge that trans people were holocausted literally. Like we were holocausted during the Holocaust. So like you can look at Nazi rhetoric about homosexuality and transsexuality and draw a literal straight line between Holocaust of Jewish and Romani and gay and trans people during World War II and now where the same things are happening. I think that especially since Biden has been put into office after Trump, there is an enormous amount of let's go back to brunch type rhetoric. And like I think that's dangerous. The moderate is dangerous. We all are familiar with MLK. The moderate is a danger to you. So I do think that, again, like if we think that it's rhetorically...
I don't think we all are familiar with MLK, but let's find out.
Like not effective. Like I'm more on the side of just demonstrating the fact of the matter rather than trying to step down off of the actual danger of the situation and say like, oh, I guess I won't call it genocidal intent. I guess I'll just say they really want there to be no more trans people and they're doing everything they can legislatively and also egging on their constituents to use their Second Amendment rights to protect their kids from groomers.
Against this since you're responding to me, if that's okay with you, Will.
Oh, I was trying to address the overall question that Will had put forward of like what is the rhetorical use, and then like I guess the second part of the question is like what is acceptable to do. Like, is that correct? Is that Will what your question was? Like the two-parter of like what do we do if there's a genocide, right?
Yeah.
Like at that point, like I can't for TOS reasons like advocate specifically for a lot of things, like because I mean for me I'm disabled and I'm trans and I'm gonna just get the fuck out of here. Like I have a 16-year-old trans brother who lives in Missouri, which is taking a second pass at trying to make it illegal for him to access medical care. Like because of the fact that I have to consider doing illegal actions in order to maintain his medical care, we have to get the fuck out. Like what the justifiable actions are against the type of people who are purporting like who are
I really wish I would have reviewed this before I put it on stream.
Supporting the genocidal intent. Like I can't say that I would do anything against them. I can't say that I would. I think that my instinct is just to leave, and that's my answer to the two-parter.
Really quickly, I think that if we all agree that there is a genocide happening, I would hope and I would pray, and I'm going to assume safely, that everybody here would say that nothing is off of the table. That if there was like an active genocide happening right now, that it would be like fucking no holds barred. Like we're going to do whatever we have to do to make sure that people aren't getting like taken and killed. And this was something that I had thought of earlier, but I just, tucked it under the rug. I think the thing that is hard with that rhetoric, Alexander, is that if we agree, right? If this was the instance that we were at, we would all be on that level with you. I think the problem is that in stating that, a lot of that begs that we rise with you to your understanding of this, even if some of us don't agree with that, right? Because I think, again, we all agree that if it was genocide, it's like, yeah, like let's burn it all down, like fuck this place, whatever. But that requires us to elevate to your understanding. And I think that's where there's that disconnect where it's like,
no. It doesn't require you to rise to that. More to the point, things can happen to you without you necessarily accepting that they're happening to you. There is an advantage in making you isolated in the context of creating a genocidal situation. There's an advantage to making you feel lost. There's an advantage to making sure that you don't see it coming until it's upon you. And it's not like it's a particularly difficult thing to realize that there's an advantage there. Like, the concept of surprise is going to be inherent. Like, people aren't going to necessarily need to be taught that it's better to sneak up on somebody than it is to openly come for them. So there's an advantage to making you see yourself in safer than as safer than you actually are. I can safer action. Well, I would have, Dirt Person, a number of discussions, and I think we've had them in the Cathedral, where I have come out pretty strongly against the concept of what's the word I'm looking for that's safe? Kinetic remedies for any problems. Because, again, there's a lot that goes into that, but it's not as easy as picking up something and fighting.
Like, people are feeling like you're being alarmist or like, you know, invoking like the system isn't enough. I think that's where that disconnect is, just from sitting from my little perch over here listening to you and Zonia talk about it. That's all.
Also, I don't think you can say alarmist rhetoric has done good and then also argue at the same time that not much has improved for trans people. At the same time, like, I also think, yeah, maybe alarmist rhetoric has had an impact, but probably in the opposite direction. I mean, in 2015, we saw a lot of alarmist rhetoric and greatly threaten trans people and other minorities at the same time. So.
You were kind of breaking up a lot there. I just want to clarify that I don't think I said that, or at least if I did say, I didn't intend for it to come across that I'm saying alarmist rhetoric has done good. What I'm saying is that we are like in every instance in which a genocidal intent has occurred, like including in the Nazi Germany, we have not been even remotely alarmist enough. It's impossible to say whether the rhetoric has done good because we're not being alarmist enough in either case.
Yeah, I think we should probably ask why that is instead of just assuming that it's because we were not freaking out enough. But sorry, go ahead, Zonia.
Yeah,
Yeah, if only there was some kind of historian here to contextualize the discussion.
going to say that I think so you mentioned that if you can say that it's genocide, that changes the proportion of the response. And I get that, you know, what you've been saying, you're saying there are things that you would like to say or could say that you can't say because of TOS issues, and I get that. But I think we all understand what you mean, right? Like I'm very much a Second Amendment person, right? Even here in liberal California. And I know exactly what I would do, you know, if people were trying to take away my livelihood, right? Obviously, I can't give specifics, TOS. But the problem I see is that there's sort of the problem is that a lot of what you say, it comes off as sort of like giving up, right?
What would you do? Huh? You'd do nothing. Nothing effective, anyway. Carry on.
If you can't advocate for what you would do, the message that comes out in the clean TOS fashion is the system is broken, it has failed, we just need to give up. There's nothing we can do to solve it. But we want this one magical word that somehow changes things. And there's a problem with that. That doesn't really, that just kind of...
No one's looking for a magical word. They're looking to acknowledge what's happening. Acknowledging what's happening. Admitting you have a problem is the first step to finding a solution.
Like, I get what you're saying about leaving Kansas, I think you said you were in, but not everybody can even leave Kansas. Like, leaving is a luxury in a way, right? Fleeing a state is actually a luxury that a lot of people just don't have. Hailing back to Ben Shapiro saying, just move, right? We don't really have, that isn't the prescription that we can give to people. There has to be other means to solve this problem, and I don't think we're at the point of just giving up entirely and going to, like, you know, resorting to banditry, you know, and everybody pulling together in bandit, you know, camps and stuff like that. I don't think that's realistic. I think that's kind of a cartoonish look at the whole thing. I don't mean to say that your views are cartoonish, but it comes off that way when you don't have anything to offer that is some kind of other prescription to address these issues. So
becoming a refugee is not the luxury position. Like, I just want to be clear that when I'm making
moving is a luxury, absolutely. Moving is a luxury that a lot of people don't have.
Selling everything you own to escape persecution in your home country is not a luxury. Like that, like when I say, like,
when I'm killed there, but
if you think people can just pack up and leave, they can't. That's a luxury by definition. When Ben Shapiro says, "Hey, you people in Florida where it's drowning, just sell your houses and move," we all know what he's talking.
That makes an argument that you are essentially going to be able to take everything with you. That's not necessarily the case. You might be fleeing. That's making a lot of assumptions that are not necessarily entered into just based on what is normative in our culture.
About there. That's unrealistic. That doesn't
You know
actually
that
work.
people come to this country with like backpacks and the clothes on their back and that's all. Like that's the situation that I feel that we're about to be in. Like I'm not saying like move to. I'm not saying emigrate to Ireland because your mom has citizenship there. I we already have a refugee situation happening in this country. When we're talking about grassroots, like I agree with you all when you say grassroots, like we need to actually make change. How about the GoFundMes of families who are fleeing persecution in their home states where their children are threatened to be taken away from them, going to California and Minnesota where there are now sanctuary laws? Like, yeah, it's not.
You're probably going to find an unintentional ally in the Air Force in this. It's going to take a while for it to go through, but their position that they took when states started cracking down on trans about bases is probably going to have a fairly significant impact.
Every single state, but it is like a problem happening within the entire country. Like there are sanctuary states for United States refugees within the United States already today as we speak.
I would absolutely welcome you here and everybody else here, but the reality is, even though you may make it out, there are a lot of people who won't make it out. There are a lot of people, they're disabled people who have difficulty just getting up and moving. I'm physically disabled. I have difficulty leaving. So there have to be other options. Like it can't just be flee the red states. There have to be other options in that. Fleeing the red states is unrealistic. Now, some people will be able to flee the red states. Most of those people are people who have some kind of means or have family in other states or people who can assist them, etc. But overall, you're talking about a large swath of very wide open territory that would be very difficult to create an underground railroad for. Keep in mind, the Underground Railroad didn't solve the problem for even 60% of the slaves, right? So keep that in mind. It only worked for a fraction. So
Where do we get to Underground Railroad? We seem to be mixing metaphors now. In one case, we have refugees, and in the other case, you're putting everything in a moving van and going somewhere.
Has to be another option. The problem is that the way that I see you presenting them, these seem like very overly simplistic answers to complicated problems, and I think there are on-the-ground solutions that we could do to resolve issues and ease the
Okay, what are the solutions?
Oppression in those states, as opposed to just coming up with this unrealistic, everybody leave the state right now solution that didn't even work for the slaves originally, only worked for a fraction of them. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, I'm not saying that
Lux respond, but then I want to see if Johnny Scarlet or Rose would like to get in. Go for Lux.
There are a number of different approaches to take to this problem. When you are a member of a persecuted minority, I don't think that it's necessarily our responsibility to take it upon ourselves to try to fix things. Like, yeah, we should be doing those things. Like, even if I leave this country, I'm still going to vote in the presidential elections. Like, I'm still going to be paying taxes to this country. And like, my thing is like, okay, yeah, there do need to be a plethora of different approaches. I don't see anyone else on this panel like proposing like a range of different options. Like, I'm the only one who's saying like leaving is probably a good idea. Even, you know, like I obviously, like, I acknowledge that there are a number of different things that we could be doing. Like, as myself, a physically and mentally disabled trans person with, you know, vulnerable younger family members, like, I would love it if I could do more actual grassroots action. You know, I would love it if owning a gun wasn't a personal danger to me. I think that it's important for people who are like you and I in positions where we can't really protect ourselves if it comes to our physical health and safety. Like I won't go to a gay club. I won't. I live in a place where mass shootings are not very common, and I won't go to a gay club because the risk of dying is significant enough that I'm like the terrorists are winning in my life, right? Like, and maybe this is like I have like a history with trauma, and so my responses are informed by a certain amount of vigilance and awareness. Like I will not be caught slipping. That's how I personally feel. I will not be caught at, like, if they come for me dragging me out of my bed, at least I will have known that I stayed too long. Like, at least I will have known the day before that that was a possibility.
I know, like, for here in some of the stuff that I've done work with, not specifically for the LGBTQ community, but sometimes with the LGBTQ community as well, we have groups that get together that do mutual aid. We have volunteer doctors to assist on their time off and such. There are people who go out of their way to spend time to provide their expertise and provide healthcare, provide medicines and stuff like that. Those are things that can be done. NGOs can get involved as well. There's a lot of different things that can be done to help ameliorate and lessen the conditions that trans people face in certain states. So we don't just have to throw our hands up and say, everybody leave the state now, and whoever's left behind, fuck you. We don't have to do that. And it's a very and again, I would say it's too much of a, you know, let's just give up kind of answer. And it's unrealistic. We need to do something to address those issues in those states. Mutual aid is probably one of the best ways to do that, I would say.
Okay, but what do you do if your mutual aid doesn't change their material condition? Like, their ability to interact in the world. And I know I said material condition. I'm going to get hit for that. But you have to do something more than give people money. It's not going to secure their existence. It might be able to secure their evacuation.
I would hope that you'd agree at least to some of that.
Mutual aid to what? Okay, well, you're going to move us on.
Yep. Johnny Scarlet or Rosemary, would you like to add on to anything?
I already live in a state of what I think it would be like if people were literally coming to trans people's doors and outing them. I already live in a state of constantly hiding who I am. I have to go by my dead name at jobs. I have in the past explicitly told myself, okay, I can't get on testosterone because then I'll be too visible. I've been rejected from getting.
Okay, and you're the one who says there's no genocide happening. We're going to take another quick break so I can take this dog out again. Be back in about 10. Thank you for sticking around. If you have stuck around, feel free to subscribe. It really helps us out. Like the stream. I'll be back in 10. Okay, I'm back.
Jobs because I introduced myself as Johnny, or because I dressed a little bit too butch that day and they happened to clock me. And I want to acknowledge that there's like a lot of people who will be in the position like I am, where they can't just move out of state and they'll have to go into a state of hiding the fact that they are trans. And that is, in fact, part of the cultural genocide that I was alluding to earlier. The idea that we can't have a queer culture.
Then how is this not an actual genocide? If you are forced to suppress yourself, is that not achieving the same functional process?
That we can't actively, openly be queer. Like it hits very close to home for me, I'll say.
All right. Can I?
Yep.
All right. So first of all, I just want to say my own personal experience, right? I live in Arizona. It's not the most progressive state in the country, and we're one of the few red cities in the big country. But first of all, my experience is this: when I was younger, the big trans clinic I went to closed down. I had to take a flight to LA sometimes in order to get my blocker shot. Right now, I understand a lot of people are not in the position where they can just buy a plane ticket to another state every 3 months. That's not something that a lot of people can do, and so it does suck. But the problem is that when you're talking about leaving, when you're talking about moving, this isn't something that's really feasible. And I think it's a good idea. I think it's a great idea if it's possible, but it's a big ask. I mean, you have a bunch of friends and family that live there, and you're just supposed to say goodbye to them. And like I said, places like California, the cost of living is a lot higher. Even if you can't afford that, your standard of living is going down. And if you're under 18, like what are you supposed to do? Convince your parents? Good luck. Basically being like, hey, my state's not trans supportive enough. Let's move to another state. And maybe your parents have to find different jobs and stuff. Like I understand the sentiments. It's just when it comes to practicalities, there's just so many things to consider.
I don't know about this necessarily. I don't know.
Uh-oh, here we go. It's Will.
If there was a genocide happening in a state, telling everybody that is currently undergoing the genocide to leave the state seems like a pretty big ask.
Yeah, it really sucks to have to give up your home because like your risk of having your children stolen from you by the state is so great. Like it's like, I'm not saying it's cute, I'm not saying it's fun, I'm not saying it's good, I'm not excited, like I'm not happy about it. Like I have imagined owning a home in my home state and I'm like, oh, what would be really great is to plant a bunch of native grasses there. And I was thinking about it recently and I was like, if I ever buy a house, I would like, oh, if I planted those same grasses in that place, they wouldn't be native grasses. And it fucking sucked. Like it was a horrible moment for me to have to recognize that if I wanted to build a life, it would have to be somewhere not where I grew up. Like I didn't ever think that I was super attached to where I lived until the prospect came upon me that like I might have no choice but to leave because it's not safe for me and my family to be here. I'm not saying I wanted to be there.
There's a lot of really raw personal stuff going into this portion of the chat, and there's value in having those discussions. I don't think it's necessarily pertinent to the discussion at hand. At least not in the way they think it is.
Thing is being rounded up into a camp, though, or being like exterminated by the state.
Is that the point that it has to be at? Like, is that where? I'm sorry. Like, a couple of times, several people on this panel have.
Genocide is the state or a terrorist group enacting violence with the intent of eradicating a group of people. I think in order to be considered a genocide, you probably need to be getting eradicated for that to happen.
So,
okay, here we are. This is it. Let's see where we go.
If you enact policies that enable people to starve to death, is that not like a genocidal policy? Like if you have policies that make a certain group of people not have enough money to buy food, but you're not literally killing them, is that not like you're like, because part of the definition is creating unlivable circumstances for the group? Like
let me white knight for Alexander. Oliver, do you think the Native Americans in this country were genocided in America?
Were the Native Americans genocided? Do you mean like the cultural genocide?
No, like were Native people genocided in this country?
I feel like we're getting into real sticky territory if we start asking that question.
Yes or no? Just a quick yes or no. That's all that you need, Alexander. Let me white knight for you.
Don't answer it. Don't answer it.
Answer it.
Don't answer it. Don't answer it.
Don't listen to me.
As his attorney, I answer.
Trans men unite. Trans men unite.
I'm sorry. I think that's a very vague and stupid fucking question. If you.
All right, I'm gonna.
What a time to cut out. Oh, that sucks. Okay, whatever.
Do we think terms or phrases like ethnocide, cultural genocide?
Okay, so we just got to the point of not only can we not establish if there's a trans genocide, we also can't establish if there was a Native American genocide. So, coming to an answer for this question, go lay down, Bubba, is kind of tricky. Genocide almost feels insufficient for what happened. We, in the terms of the Native American and the indigenous population being, well, in a lot of cases slaughtered or tricked, there, genocide feels insufficient. Like, it doesn't feel like you have a sufficient enough encompassing definition of 400 years of westward expansion in history. So, insofar as it's a vague question, I think it's an answerable question, and I think you could probably answer that question. What are you doing?
Transide, etc. Do we feel like any of those have any value in the current discourse? And if so,
No.
what words do you like to use, and why do you like to use them instead of genocide?
Because genocide is a trigger word, and it sets everybody off.
Start with Malcolm. That's the only reason, though?
Well, a big part of it, again, like I was talking about earlier, is that the reason that we have like specific words to like describe specific things is to communicate what we're experiencing clearly, so people can respond appropriately with the right amount of force, right? If I call 911 and I say somebody's murdering me right fucking now, and it's my mom taking away my Xbox, the police are gonna come in and kill my mom. That level of response is not communicated. It is not effective for me to use such like loaded language to.
Not necessarily. Carry on.
get a response that I want. And we understand this with literally everything else. I don't know why everybody's brain turns off when we're talking about this. If we're talking about racism, individual.
We don't understand this with everyone else. We don't. People use hyperbolic language to describe fairly ordinary situations all the time.
Interpersonal racism, systemic oppression, microaggressions, all of these things are going to be different. Even as trans people here, we all know that we don't all neatly fit under the label of trans. Like, I'm a trans man. I'm not the same as Zonia. I'm not the same as Rose. I like the word trans man. Do you guys like the word trans woman or whatever? Alexander likes the word non-binary. Johnny Scarlett likes the word non-binary, right? Like, these kinds of specifics in language provoke a certain response that we want. And the whole point of that is that we have a desired outcome that we want. And if our desired outcome is for everybody to go fucking rogue and roam the streets with their trans painted fucking AR-15s just fucking murdering people because we want to trick everybody into thinking that we're being executed in the streets right now, that's going to be the outcome that we get, and it's going to backfire really fucking hard. The point of using language is to demand a specific response and conjure a specific image in people's mind. And
no, all of that is a logical fallacy. That is, at best, a slippery slope.
Love it or hate it, genocide is tainted. Everybody thinks about Schindler's List. Everybody thinks about the Holocaust. Everybody thinks about, World War II, Nazi Germany. It's gone. It's done. We have to pick another word. We have to be more specific with our language because everybody's brains will just power down the second that we say it. And that's all.
I would say, why do we even need a word?
We have Johnny Scarlett go.
Sure. I had not personally, and I realize this because I haven't been terminally online for the past year or so, but I had not personally heard the term transgenocide until a few months ago. And so in the personal advocacy that I do in being somewhat of a queer elder in my community, I know I'm not that old, but we don't have a lot of open gay people out here. I address systemic oppression with the word systemic oppression. I address microaggression with the word microaggression. And I don't really have a catch-all for all of these things. I think that it's been said pretty clearly on this panel up to this point that this is I think Zonia said it really perfectly a little while ago. This is a wide range of issues that are going on. So when I talk about my lack of access to medical care, I talk about medical care. Like, there's not a good catch-all word.
Rosemary.
Yeah, so I think using buzzwords like this can actually be harmful. I think we need a good example of that, right? Like, think about the words like critical race theory or patriarchy, right? You could use this exact same argument. You could literally say, oh, this is what this is, and explain the concept to somebody without using those words, and they'll be a lot more receptive because they don't have that stigma attached to it. They don't have, people feeding in their ear, this thing is bad, or I should listen because they said this thing. When you explain the concept in a way that makes sense to them without using the buzzwords that they already have emotions tied to, I think you'll find that people who aren't, in your corner, in your echo chamber, are much more likely to listen. Maybe they won't fully understand, maybe they won't fully agree, but I think there is a little bit that helps from that.
Can you clarify what you mean by, do you disapprove of do you disapprove with all of the words that I listed, including genocide, being used to describe?
I do. I just don't think that it's really helpful to use them. And I'd love to hear arguments against this as to why we should use those words, but I just don't see how, if I'm talking to an average normal person, how using this...
She's been doing that all panel. All panel.
Word is going to help me in any way. Like, how is that going to convince them? I just don't see it personally. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see it.
Let's have Power Bottom Politics go.
Give me 1 second. I think the more terms that you use, the more complicated it gets for regular people to be able to understand what you're talking about. I think the more that you try and wrap
You are a thoroughly regular person. Hate to break it to you.
up concepts into terms instead of just explaining them to people in regular language, it gets more difficult for them to follow along and take you seriously. If I were to go to somebody and talk to them about the cultural trans side of the marginalized non-binary groups of different trans people and all that. Sorry, no shade to anybody. I'm just saying that the more words that you use that are maybe they may be common in our spaces, but in the general population they're not very common. I think it just turns people off and makes them glaze over.
Okay, but what does that say about this entire set of circumstances? What does that say if you think you cannot talk about your experiences with words that describe them? What does that say if you're reaching for language that resonates with people, that doesn't have a negative connotation? What does that say about your position in society? All right, have a good night, Connor.
Let's have Zonia, and then we'll have Alexander go.
So I would say, why do we even have to handcuff ourselves to one word, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Think about just the fact that the representation of trans people we have on this panel. We can't even all mutually agree on any one thing anywhere. It's not like we're a monolith. Just because we happen to be trans doesn't mean we all suddenly fully line up in lockstep with our views on trans issues, on what is affecting trans people, on what constitutes trans, right? There's so many disagreements, so many different views, so many different perspectives. We're a very colorful lot. So why would we even handcuff ourselves to one word? We're never going to have mutual agreement on any one word. We're never going to have a collective uniting behind one word. That's just not going to happen. So it doesn't make any sense to even bother trying to say, well, what word should all the trans people use? We don't even have a committee of people that hands down to the rest of the trans community. Here is your word to explain your oppression, right? These things don't exist. So I would say, why don't we instead find ways to describe the individual issues that affect us? And we're going to have different ways of describing it. Some of us are going to use certain words and some of us won't use those words. I think that's okay. I think that's just fine.
So Alexander, answer, and then I have a question from the chat.
So something that I have consistently been hoping for in the course of this conversation is some concrete alternatives to describe the situation that we're dealing with. Like Malcolm dropped out. I wonder if his internet poo-pooed or something. No, he said he was going to need to drop out after a certain point. So Malcolm made this I think more than anyone else has made an allusion to something that we should be doing instead. Like what I'm hearing is a lot of no, you shouldn't say genocide from everybody on this panel, and not a lot of here's how we can accurately describe specifically the material conditions of death that we're experiencing in like a constructive way. I'm mostly not really hearing any alternatives even being proposed that I could potentially consider as alternatives to, and like again, I'm not intending to be alarmist. Like I do think that you should be alarmed with what the situation is as it's described. Like I've made the video. I can't go through it like point by point in this debate panel, like because this is not a TED Talk, but like I can demonstrate to you every single step up to step fucking 8 on like the genocide scale. And like again, like those things are not necessarily prescribed to happen in a certain order or anything, but I can demonstrate all of them. And no one has really offered an alternative. Like, yeah, like if you, like, again, if rhetorically you think that the word genocide is ineffective, even if it's 100% accurate, I would like to be able to at least consider some alternatives.
So the problem I see is that you're basically trying to say that the word genocide somehow translates to the average person and tells them, oh, there are these
Stop. She asked for an alternative. Give her an alternative.
trans bills targeting trans people in Texas. Like that doesn't sound right. Like what Malcolm proposed is describe these things, like talk about these things. The word genocide doesn't describe those things. It doesn't tell anybody the specifics of what's going on. It doesn't elaborate on the issues that trans people face. It's most lay people don't even know what the word genocide means, other than they think of the Holocaust or like the Armenian genocide, right? Which is a systematic slaughter of people. So that word doesn't translate to most people in any meaningful way beyond Holocaust. So why not describe, as Malcolm had elaborated, describe the actual issues? There are 30 anti-trans bills this year in this state right now, all being considered.
Professor,
why don't we address those? There are anti-trans bathroom laws in Florida. Why don't we address that? Like that's what you can actually talk about are meaningful issues, as opposed to this weird magical word that the vast majority of lay people don't even know the definition of.
Well, so my question is, how do you describe? So you can say these are the bills that are happening, and it's really not great because trans people need access to healthcare, like whatever. Like how do you describe? Like there's a conclusion, right? Like because telling people what is happening is like, yeah, but like, what does that mean? What is that for? Why are you telling me? What like if you're pitching this to someone, the like the meat of your essay is here are all these things that are happening. Conclusion paragraph. Like what I want to know is how do you describe in totality the stochastic terrorism plus the anti-trans laws with the suicide rates and the interpersonal violence and stuff like that? Like how do you propose to describe in totality that clump of events?
I got you.
Thank you.
Systemic discrimination.
Is that actually communicating the severity of the problem though? Like what I'm asking is like these are attempts to reduce numbers in the group. That is an eradication attempt.
The severity of the problem matter when you're trying to solve it? Is it not just a problem that should be solved along with the
Yes, the severity of a problem matters when you're trying to solve it. It helps you prioritize what problems you should solve first.
Systemic discrimination of every other minority in this
You're
country?
the one talking about getting normies on board, my friend. Like, do you think that normies hear the word systemic oppression and think like, oh, people are
You were
dying?
asking for an alternative word. I gave you an alternative word. That's pretty much all I can say for that. If I'm talking to normies, I wouldn't be really having this conversation at all. I'd be trying to, get them to see me as a human being for the first place. So
Is it all right if I hop in for 1 second? Will?
Absolutely denying. What do you got to say there?
Flex, just as a proposition, one word that's been used, for example, from a model that was created by a social scientist named Michael Mann, he created to describe like atrocities against ethnic groups. So his model isn't exactly, obviously one parallel with trans people. But what he came up with was like there's different types of cleansings that exist and different types of violence that also exist among these. So depending on, for example, the intent you believe that Republicans take towards trans people, one model he came up with was institutional coercion that I think kind of exists currently against trans people. This obviously exists with, kind of taking away children from families that, for example, they're going to transition. So if, for example, the goal is to get rid of all trans people, he came up with cultural suppression. With the other one he came up with, where if you don't think the goal is exactly to eliminate a total number or something like this, it's just discrimination, right? These are just like two terms we're trying to categorize types of institutional coercion that existed towards the elimination of the group. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like I think where my issue is, like, I thank you. Like I appreciate your expertise on this matter, first of all. I appreciate that you did
I appreciate the fact that you finally spoke up after 2 hours and 24 minutes.
include, at least toward the end there, the word elimination. Like, because that's kind of what I guess like what my sticking point is on, like, when I'm asking for different terms to describe what's happening. Systemic oppression is not, it's not like I'm looking for a synonym for genocide that accurately describes the severity of the situation. And so like eliminationist policies, eradication policies.
Systemic discrimination like serious enough? Like I'd say that's pretty serious. Why are we downplaying systemic discrimination in favor of the word genocide?
Because systemic discrimination does not communicate the severity of the situation. Like a discrimination has a completely different connotation going into it than genocide. When I say I'm discriminating against someone, I don't necessarily mean to say that I'm trying to kill them.
Malcolm, who I believe is the only POC who was on this panel, pointed out, like systemic oppression could refer to touching a black person's hair and also the black person getting shot in the street. Like there is like such a huge range of severity that is included in that phrase that it's not specific enough.
Yeah. I don't think that touching a black person's hair in the street is systemic discrimination. That sounds like very individual discrimination.
But if you think that you can touch another person without their permission, you have ownership over their body, it is inherently a racist thing to do. Like it's part of systemic oppression where white people feel like they have ownership over black people's bodies.
What do you think about calling it a crime against humanity?
Systemic discrimination requires like the system.
Crime against humanity is a horrible term because it can encompass a great deal of stuff and does not necessarily recommend itself a course of action.
To be oppressing you, not somebody individually in the street touching your hair. Those seem like two different things.
Oh, so you're going to argue from the academic position and not from the materialist position? We're probably just not going to agree on that.
I'm trying to argue from the position of the definition of systemic discrimination, but
I mean, I'm a sociology enthusiast. So to me, like systemic means like you zoom in on the micro and you can zoom out to the macro. So like an individual racist interaction is part of systemic discrimination to me. So I like that just might be a definitional conflict.
So what's the difference between individual and systemic discrimination?
Was that a question of what's the difference?
I'm genuinely curious because I'm learning a little bit about the differences here from a sociology major. If systemic discrimination involves like individual, like interpersonal behavior, then what's the point of having individual versus systemic discrimination?
Systemic, it's kind of like how rectangle and square, like systemic racism. Like maybe, like again, this is like maybe an academic definition. Like I just don't draw distinctions between the things that are happening on the large scale and the things that are happening at the small scale because I can see the ways in which they're inherently connected.
I can understand that, but I think that drawing some distinctions could actually help us find better definitions for what is going on. What is going on with trans people versus just lumping every bad thing that's ever.
Let's just call it a genocide and be done with it.
Happened under genocide or something similar, where it's like, you know, even if there's some systemic discrimination happening to trans people, suddenly it's lumped under genocide instead of just refining the definition of systemic discrimination.
I did not say that every bad thing that's ever happened to trans people is part of genocide.
I was trying to correct myself. I apologize for that. That is not the way I meant it to come out. I just mean that like I've seen multiple different arguments and it just for a second my brain farted. My bad about that. But you get my underlying point.
I think that a government making policies that are attempting to create unlivable conditions for a group of people and which results in the death of those people is eliminationist, it's eradication, it's genocide. Like,
and I think that's happening to multiple different minorities. So
true, you're right.
The difference between those other minorities and this one, or all
there isn't a difference. No,
so
I've already said there are very specific groups that are being genocided. I really
specific groups meaning like different minorities.
Yes, you asked me this question very specifically at the beginning, and I don't appreciate the casting my argument as saying, oh, every group.
Let's take a second here. This is why I don't like panels. At this point, Lux is heroic. Pin a medal, something, recognition.
Oh, everybody's getting genocided. No, black people are getting genocided. Native American people are getting genocided. Trans people are getting genocided. It's demonstrable in every case. Like, not every bad action is an attempt to reduce numbers in the group or create unlivable conditions for them so that they remain an oppressed minority permanently, and so that their population never grows beyond a certain point. Like, white people are scared of the quote unquote white genocide, where like, oh, if we let in too many immigrants and they outbreed us, and if we let the black people succeed and they outbreed us, then they'll do to us what we did to them. Like, yeah, the United States government on official policy is engaged in multiple different targeted attempts to reduce membership. Actually, like, and to be clear, I didn't mention migrants yet, but migrants, removal from families, put in cages, put with white families. 4. I count 4 at minimum active genocides that the United States government is currently engaged in. You asked me to tell you what the difference is. There isn't one.
Okay,
Yeah,
so before we continue,
before
we continue, I am going to assume that the other 4 people on this panel do not agree with that. So how about I want us to kind of go around and maybe break that down a little bit. Like,
yes, because you stacked the panel. Delete your channel, Will. Just do it. Just do it for the good of everyone. Do it.
If you agree that there are currently 4 active genocides in the United States, yeah, let's talk about that. Can we start with Karl and then Zonia, and then Rose and Johnny?
I think genocide has a very specific definition. I understand that, like, for rhetorical purposes, oftentimes, like, the specific definitions get used a little more loosely. The problem for me is that genocide is a crime, much similar to other crimes that people get accused of sometimes on a more individual basis. I think that it is very important to be correct when you're accusing a country, state, etc., or a person individually of a crime in general. When we use the word genocide in order to describe the discrimination of every minority, I think we're really just watering down the term genocide and making it more difficult to identify actual genocide. I think that the systemic discrimination of black people, indigenous people, trans people, etc., are all serious. I think we should take it seriously, and I've said in my opening statements and throughout this conversation that I think that the systemic discrimination against minorities should be taken extremely seriously. I don't think that we need to emotionally manipulate people by misusing a word or accusing falsely a state or country of a crime.
You have not established that it is false.
In order to get people on our side. That is typically not really worked that great for us, and also it just waters down the definition and makes it very difficult to actually identify real genocides that are happening. If you want to take it seriously, then get people to stop overusing the word systemic discrimination for everything. Maybe then you'll actually have a chance at getting people to take that seriously, because that used to also be a thing that people took seriously until people overused that word. That's my opinion on that.
Okay, let's put that all on her. That's a great plan.
Go to the next person. I don't give a shit.
So I largely agree with PB here. Like this is the problem with like stretching the definitions of words. It's like, okay, how are you going to get anybody to take this seriously if the whole point is to sort of get...
You have not stretched the definition of words. You have not established that it has been stretched. You are taking for granted. You are begging the question.
Alarm out there so people look at it and take it seriously, and then you say, oh, by the way, there's 4 active genocides going in the US. People are going to look at you like you're ridiculous.
Yeah, because they grew up in the United States being brainwashed. Sorry.
Academics will look at you like you're being ridiculous.
I'm an academic and I'm not looking at her like she's ridiculous.
So just keep that in mind. It has nothing to do with growing up in the United States. The world around, people who are actually dealing with genocides outside of the US are going to be like, what the fuck are these privileged people talking about, right? So you are not winning people over with this kind of thing. You're watering the whole definition down, and you are lowering that threshold of alarm. So people are going to stop taking it seriously. People are going to look at it like this is ridiculous. When you're crying wolf at this point, right? You're going to become the person who cried wolf, the trans person who cried wolf. So this is completely counterproductive. Now, if you wanted to have sort of like the philosophical discussion in sort of a vacuum with people about, hey, these different things that are going on, do these things fit the definition of genocide? Sure, that's great. You could have that in a vacuum. You could have that incubated conversation religion. But as soon as you start trying to take it out to the rest of the world and tell other people, by the way, there's 4 active genocides going on in the U.S., that's not going to make any sense to them, and they're going to think you're kidding. They're not going to take you seriously. So these are okay to kind of spitball with colleagues who will analyze this in a similar kind of way, but it doesn't fit when it steps outside of your little bubble and goes into the general world, the general population. That's where it will fall flat, and that's where you're going to look like an idiot.
I want to, before Rosemary and Johnny Scarlett goes, I want to maybe attempt to steal the idea that maybe the African American population in America is currently undergoing a genocide and has been since they landed on our shores in 1619. I think that if you really look at, so many laws going back from just literally all the way back from when they hit our shores. I think that you could use that model theoretically, and if you think that...
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. What laws, first of all? Second of all, our shores, whose shores?
There's currently a trans genocide going, then I think that you would have to assume that there is a genocide against Black people currently, in America at least. And this is a personal tidbit, so I know I wasn't supposed to do that, but I would think that there is definitely, there has been an ongoing genocide, against Black people in America for this entire time. It's the systemic discrimination that's been, that's led to the disparity between white people and African American people in America. It's huge. You can't deny it. So yeah, John Scarlett, Rosemary.
There's a problem. Hold on, there's a problem with this line of questioning because you're bringing people into a situation where inevitably they're going to say things that people are going to have a pretty serious problem with. You're placing people in a sort of a sticky situation where it's, how they say it, and if they say it incorrectly, if they answer in a way that people
Congratulations. Welcome to the entire point of this panel.
aren't happy with, or something that's going to create a bit of a problem. So this kind of gets into very, very treacherous territory of, hey, how bad is the oppression of another minority group that none of us belong to, right? You're asking for people to risk a lot just to have this conversation. I'll just say outright, I'm not.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Going to have the discussion because I think it gets a little bit too ridiculous debating whether or not some other minority's oppression meets the scale of a genocide. I think that's kind of a fucked up thing to have that discussion in a public setting. I gotta go to the bathroom, by the way.
So that would
stay in that bathroom. Just stay there.
Well, I think I would just be curious.
Yep.
I was just going to say I would be curious to know what definition of genocide you're using when you say that African Americans have been genocide in this country.
Oh God.
What do you call it? The UN definition.
The UN definition?
Just because, and the real kicker for me is intent. I think that there are pretty demonstrable ways that there's been intent with discriminating against African American people in our country. A lot of intent.
Okay, Will, but here we have the problem. What is the difference between a genocide of African Americans and a genocide of trans people? And if the kicker for you is intent, then how can you say that one is not showing intent when one is? Why? Do you get how inconsistent that is?
This may be a nitpick, and I'm not going to argue on this. I mean, again, this is a panel on the trans genocide, not African American genocide. I get your point. I do want to just say I think there are multiple different reasons why somebody could be discriminating against a group of people that do not have to relate to eradicating them from the country. Yeah, I see some people talking muted, but I'm just saying it's if there's a population that's more likely to vote for a certain demographic, I don't think Republicans are going to want to be voted out of office. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't always have to be just we want to get rid of the people on this in this country. We're talking about a genocide. If that's been going on ever since Black people came to this country, they've been doing a pretty shit job of getting rid of them because they're still here. How many hundreds of years later? So
again, we have locked ourselves into a very specific position of genocide that focuses on outcome and not process.
I don't know. I think that the genocide has to do with eradication of a group or the attempt of it. I know that Germany did not get rid of all the Jews and all that, but they really sure did try, and they killed 6 million of them, intentionally to try and get rid of them out of the country. It's not the same thing as exploiting a group of people or trying to move them to certain sections of the state so that they're less likely to be able to vote. No, those are different things.
Except that those were similar actions to what Germany took to control the Jewish population prior to beginning the extermination.
They're still serious. I don't know why we can't just say that multiple things can both have the same amount of seriousness to them.
They are steps in the lead up to eradication, as demonstrated by people who study genocide. The not so bad. The not so bad things that you keep alluding to, oh, you're just being discriminated against. That's part of the genocide.
And here's
the genocide has already started.
Idea. Talk about more solutions and less virtue signaling about how you think it's a fucking genocide. How about you talk more about actual solutions and instead of just coming on here and telling everybody that we should be calling it a certain word and without offering any way of making it not go past stage 4. You think I want to be genocided? How about you just make sure that it doesn't go past stage 4 or whatever stage it's at? There's 10 stages, right? We don't have to get to the last stage.
The subject of the panel is whether
You don't understand the stages. You need to go to the bathroom now, too. Take a chill pill.
word genocide is accurate. That's the whole subject of the fucking panel, is whether the word genocide is accurate to this situation.
Genocide you can say yes versus the entire panel saying no.
I want denying to get in here really quick. I'm actually just really, for me personally, it's just something I'm really curious about. Does extermination necessitate genocide?
No.
Okay,
This
that's
is something
my
you need to be really very careful with. So we're dealing with like statins, like 10 stages of genocide, right? The thing is these are supposed to be like identifiable categories to like try and identify something is genocide. Not all these actually follow a pattern that like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 happen in a row or whatever, right? There can be genocides, for example, that according to statin do not include the term, include, for example, categorization or stuff. But like also there's cases, for example, from the list where states do this all the time. Like according to it, if we take like really broad understandings of it, classification, right? We have censuses every 4 years in almost every single country on the planet, and these can record your nationality, your race, your ethnicity, your economic status, your gender. And this is a type of classification that can exist that, for example, doesn't always take some type of malicious intent with it. So you should probably be careful, for example, when even just using statins 10 stages, because either things can exist that are on that list that don't really become genocide, or, for example, there can be events like the rape of Nanking, where, according to the Chinese, around 300,000 to like 400,000 of a population of 600,000 in one city were killed in a matter of 6 weeks, right? Now, the Chinese, the Japanese, Western scholars, they don't call this genocide, but this is a substantial scale of killing. So extermination itself doesn't automatically mean genocide. Kind of like commentating real quick on like kind of the whole are black people in the past and now facing genocide thing. One thing that might be kind of interesting to make analogous right now with the current situation of trans people is, I can't remember the years, I think it was 1953 to be exact. The African American community wrote a pamphlet called We Charge Genocide. And one of the accusations is really similar to what Lux brought up, which was that the United States was taking policies to try and reduce black birth rate, the black birth rate basically. And, you know, Lemkin at the time was lobbying also for United States ratification of the Genocide Convention. In fact, a lot of people forget that we didn't ratify it until the 1980s. But when Lemkin was talking about, for example, the experience of black people at the time, Lemkin himself went and wrote letters to the organizers of the pamphlet, letters to the New York Times, to senators, basically saying that like the problem with calling this genocide or looking at the aspects that they bring up inside the document is more two things need to be proven. One was intent. When we kind of look at intent, usually we need to like not find just, for example, a knowledge-based understanding that this will either increase the trans suicide rate or, for example, lead to killing of people. It's more that there has to be like a desire upon the person enacting this policy for that type of result. And when he commentated on this along with his associates, they said, okay, the goal of this is to put the black person in his place, to quote, rather than say exterminate them in whole or in part. Because when he talked about in part, it meant that you destroy a numerically substantial part of a group. So that's the kind of thing that's worth mentioning. And he argued that, for example, a lot of the lynchings.
The problem I have here, and I can see the objection to it already. Where would the black population be if none of those things had happened? Like, and I can't answer that question. That's entirely theoretical. That's like a alternate history type deal. And we're not going to be what if altist here because he's horrible. But the trouble is that, like I was saying before, you can have the tools and not necessarily use them. You don't have to hit a nail with a hammer. You can try to drive it in another way, although you shouldn't. Just as a general handyman thing. I'm tired. What's going on? But saying that just because the tools exist doesn't mean that the thing is happening doesn't answer the principal question.
Things that happened, a lot of the horrible policies that existed at the time, such as redlining, that to him, it didn't amount to genocide. I mean, this is a guy who coined it, so I don't know.
Right, but Lemkin doesn't necessarily get the final word. Like, part of the scholarship here has to be looking beyond Lemkin.
Thank you for that, Design. I really appreciate that history. So let's have Johnny and Rosemole. Let's very briefly, if you have, I don't know how much more there is to possibly say on this, but I kind of just want to hit on this for a little bit longer, literally, and then I want to wrap this up in the next 20 minutes, and just try to lead the conversation to something a little bit away from this topic. So, Rose and Johnny. Let's do Rose first.
Well, I actually had a lot to say. First of all, when it comes to the whole race thing, I'm not touching that, right? This is a trans day. I don't think it's really relevant, but I don't think there's any genocide happening in the United States, and I just think it's weird to call out, like, saying, like, it's ridiculous to say there's a white genocide when you're saying there's 4 other different genocides to pretty much every other group. I think it's all the same thing. I think a lot of people just like to use the word genocide way too liberally, and I think that's the problem. I think that's a huge issue, right? And I think maybe the issue isn't even the wording anymore. I think maybe it's just overstating the severity of the situation. I mean, I heard Lux state a couple times, like, dying and death, and it's like, I personally don't see it. If that was true, and this is actually happening, there's a bunch of people dying right now, that would be a terrible thing, and I would be totally like, we need to do everything we can to stop this. I just don't see it right now, so I'm just confused as to where you're getting this conclusion from.
Yeah, I think a large part of this, as Denying put it, is intent. Intent to keep children from transitioning, or intent to stop trans healthcare from being as liberally administered as we would like it to be, doesn't have the intent of making trans people suicidal. It is largely from the fear of parents that their children will become transgender. I accept that. However, adults are still allowed to do basically whatever they want in this country. And I personally am also not of the opinion that we should be discussing the issues of other subgroups in this particular panel. I think that that's not our place. This has always been a semantic issue. And Lux, I think that you've put forward a lot of really great evidence for systemic oppression, systemic suppression, and perhaps even the eliminationist policies of a lot of extremists in this country. However, this has always been a discussion of not necessarily the definition of the word, but of the usage and how it is useful. So I'm still firmly on the camp that this is not a useful term in order to get people on our side. However, I can't deny what Lux has put
That don't make it not a genocide.
forward. I just don't think that it's something that I would personally use in my own advocacy.
Okay, so this is a question for Lux specifically from the chat.
Oh, good.
So, to the extent we choose to use the term genocide in discourse, do you think that it's important to, 1, identify the agents of the genocide, and 2, describe the amount of power they actually have to carry out their intentions?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, no, I do think that that's fairly important. And I think that it's even something that I've already witnessed happening. I've already seen people, like, posting personal information of transphobic politicians, which may or may not be TOS. I can't really speak to that. Like, so I've kind of already seen that happening where we're identifying, like, this person in specific has done XYZ, and that's a problem. Like, protesting outside their house is about the extent to which I will like propose that we should do something about that. Like, if you, like, again, like bothering them in the diner, if you catch them in public, like, yeah, make their life hell as much as you can, like within the limits of free speech and everything. Like, I do think that could potentially be useful. Like, I don't know what you're planning on doing with that information. It's like, I must ask you the same question, Chatter, as I would ask the state of Texas about why did you want a list of trans people who've changed their gender in the last 2 years? But yeah, I mean, I think that identifying those specific individuals, if for nothing else, then like you can then create a campaign around, oh, I don't want this person to get reelected. Let's focus our attention on this district where they could get ousted by a Democrat or something along those lines. Like, yeah, so long as the system is there, I think that those are things that you could be doing.
Okay, I think that kind of answers some of the follow-up questions to maybe what other people were trying to ask you too. Does anyone else want to tackle the question before I move on to a less genocide-related question?
Ask me the question again.
Absolutely. For everybody on the panel now, to the extent we choose to use the term genocide in discourse, do you all think it's important to, 1, identify the agents of the genocide, and 2, describe the amount of power that they actually have to carry out their intentions?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is that's part of the idea of a genocide, is that you would have a concerted effort on the part of a group or groups, and identifying those groups is probably the first step in that.
Yeah, I would say there's not really a point in really calling out a genocide if you're not ready to also then identify those who are enacting the genocide and the power that they have to actualize it. So I would say that if you're ready to use the word genocide, it should be important to you to want to identify the culprit.
Okay, but that is not a system you're going to be able to describe or build a coherent definition of inside of this format. So if this carries on the way I think it will, I don't think that's a fair criticism of Lux's position.
Culprits and the power that they hold.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm gonna see if Salem wants to come in. Salem, if you want to come in, get in the green room. Until then, I'm gonna ask a less genocide-related question. So, what does it mean for trans people to lead the discussion on trans issues?
Oh,
and,
God.
We're gonna start with power, love, and politics.
He's relitigating the poly debate.
Yes, I'm sorry.
He's relitigating the poly debate without poly here.
Crazy. What?
No, my bad. I put it in the chat. I had to run off for a second. My bad. If you don't mind just repeating the question that you mentioned, I had to talk to my father-in-law for a moment.
No problem, of course. What is it? This is like a question, for all the cis people out here. I'm legitimately trying to, like, figure out how to, be better at handling this kind of discussion and these types of issues. So that's kind of more where I'm coming from with these questions. Legitimately trying to better myself out here. So what does it mean for trans people to lead the discussion on trans issues?
Personally, I think that people are always going to be more vocal about the issues that affect them the most. So trans people are probably most likely going to be more vocal about their own issues. I'm not going to lie, when I read that question, when you sent it to me, I was a little bit confused what you meant by that. I'm kind of guessing you just meant like what would it look like for trans people to advocate for themselves, or am I getting that wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of this phrase that goes around, that's sort of like trans people should be leading the discussion on trans issues. Black people should be leading the discussion on black issues. I'll admit, as a cis white male, there aren't too many issues that cis white males are the only people that can lead the discussion on, right? So
you could lead the discussion on like genocide.
Okay, well,
I
one
guess
day
that doesn't
will
seem
look like a cis white male. One day I too will pass as a cis white male, and then nobody will be able to argue. I'm kidding. I think that the minority group itself is always going to be the first to speak on their own issues. I love it when cis people, especially like you, what you've been doing with this panel and what you've been doing with some of the questions you've asked behind the scenes, just trying to get on board with everybody and be open and understanding and empathetic. I think that's like really important. I always want, it sounds silly to say, but I always want more cis people or more people who are not trans advocating for trans issues. Even like hopefully it should always be done well. If you don't have the confidence to advocate for the positions, you should probably like hold off or at least acknowledge that you may not know everything, just so that you don't spread misinformation or misrepresent somebody. But I think the more people who advocate for trans issues, the more positive impact it will have on society as a whole.
You lagged out there at the end, but I think we understood what you meant in spirit.
Okay, the last thing that I said was just oh sorry, my bad.
No, you can go. You
I
can
thought
go.
it's only half an hour
What were you
left.
saying? Last 10 seconds.
I was just gonna yeah, I was just gonna say I think the more people advocating for trans issues, the more positive of an impact it will have on society as a whole.
Based. Rose.
Yeah, so I think when we say like, oh, why are trans people the ones that have to lead this conversation? I think there's actually a lot of controversy. I think most people would agree with that sentiment, but some others. I think it's really because we're the ones that are impacted by this, right? When all these laws come into place, at the end of the day, it's affecting us. These are our rights that are on the table, and if stuff's gonna get taken away from us, it's like I think that we should have our voices kind of elevated to be like, hey, it's higher stakes for me. Let me have a bigger seat at the table. That being said, though, I think a lot of times it gets this weird position where it's like if you're not trans, don't speak, and I think that's silly. Like you gotta have a certain level to it. Let's face it, there's not a lot of trans people out there. Okay, we're not a hugely populated minority. Very few of us. We need cis people to advocate for us because if they didn't, nothing would get done. If we don't have those advocates, we're not getting rights. I just think that we need to be nicer to cis allies to make them want to help us, and also just make sure that they're doing a good job. They understand what they're talking about, because there are people who want to advocate for trans people, but kind of just say the wrong things. But I think as long as you're have good intentions and you just want what's best for people, don't listen to people that are just going to hate you for that, especially to Will. If you have good intentions and you want to learn, that's really what's important. You know what I'm saying?
Johnny.
So the way that it comes up in my life is that I express, usually it's my name. I express that my name is Johnny, and sometimes people who are kind of in the know will be like, okay, yeah, what are your pronouns? It's a very simple, for me, it's a very simple aspect of being patient with people, answering their questions, posing them questions, living authentically, and hoping that being the trans person in somebody's life is going to make a difference. I usually don't initiate conversations on my
That is a very human reaction. I'm not sure that is an effective reaction for reasons we discussed previously. People are very willing to make a divide between someone they know and a group, even if that person is part of a group. So the goodwill that someone transfers or shows to you does not necessarily transfer out to a wider group.
my transness in real life, but on stream it happens a lot. And that's simply a protection thing. I think answering questions in a patient way is the best way to go about leading the discussion on trans people, because we are a small minority and we do have a lot of misinformation out there thrown out about us. And that's not something that's our fault, but it's something that we can do something about by being authentic in our communities.
Sonia.
I think this whole narrative that that trans people should be leading the discussion on trans issues is erroneous at best, because who are the appropriate leaders? As mentioned before, it's not like we have a committee of representatives, where people we elect to represent us. And I certainly don't want Blair White or Buck Angel representing us. I don't want them to be the ones leading the trans discussion. There are a whole lot of really shitty trans people who have really, really bad takes on trans issues. And I think, as it is, we all don't largely agree on a lot.
So it sounds like you really want a committee. You want someone to say who can and cannot be the voice.
A lot of things. So I think it comes down to, we can advocate for ourselves and we can advocate for each other, but to think that we should be somehow just leading the discussion is naive and dangerous, because then you kind of leave it up to, if the instruction to cis people is just listen to and trust trans people, they're right about this. It's what if they listen to a Blair White, or what if they listen to a Buck Angel? I don't want that. I don't want them taking Blair White and Buck Angel seriously as representatives of trans issues. So I think it's really important to not send that kind of message, and we can stand up for ourselves and advocate for ourselves and advocate for each other and do that independently. And some of us will have, be a little more persuasive and a little bit better at advocating in a way that reaches a broader range of people. Hopefully the better of us will do it, and not the Blair Whites. But yeah, and I think also in addition to that, there are a lot of cis people who actually are pretty good at advocating for trans issues. And I think that sends a really good message too. Cis people advocating for trans issues to other cis people translates very well. And so I'd like to see a lot more of that. I'd like to see sort of a coalition of both cis allies and trans people advocating together and supporting each other. I'd also like to say that, there's a lot of this whole sort of puritanical view of allies need to be perfect, right? And a lot of people who like to say you're a bad ally. I don't think that's helpful. I think in general, we're not going to find perfect allies. And the important thing to do is to find allies who are understanding and who want to listen and who want to help. And they're going to fuck up sometimes. They're going to say some stupid things. They're going to do some dumb things. That's okay. Allies are allies, and it's better than having no allies, right? So that's my position on it.
Lux.
Sorry, the idea that is meant to be conveyed when people say let trans people lead the discussion, what people mean is this is a relatively small group of people and they are not often listened to. So in general, we should as everybody else on this panel has basically said, cis people should pay them mind. I think that the more reflective way of looking at the concept of letting trans people lead the discussion is taking the time to listen to the opinion that you feel affronted by, I guess. Blair White and Buck Angel have become the face of trans people publicly because they use rhetorical devices that appeal to the majority, which I think that like several of you generally seem to do also, like to different degrees. Like they will say things like Buck will say something like, I'm a man who's living as a woman, in order to appeal to a broader argument, right? Like I don't think anybody on this panel goes quite that far, but like there is some extent to which like we kind of only get heard, like we only get a place at the table if we're saying things in a way that is palatable and appealing. That's tone policing. Like the political phrase that we use to describe this is like, you know, not listening to people because we think they're just too angry. Like I think that you're being inflammatory by calling this a genocide. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to any of the reasons why you use that word. Like, so I don't like, and I don't think that it's necessarily good that, you know, the side effect of this rhetoric is that some people will be like, well, I do listen to a trans woman. Blair White said, yada, yada, yada. I think it has to do with taking that time to listen and really process the argument that you're disagreeing with rather than in your mind going, I disagree with this and I need to argue against it.
All right, last question. And then we'll wrap it up, let everybody do outros, and we'll be on our way. Thanks everybody for sticking it out, by the way. I appreciate y'all. So let's say hypothetically you are a person who does like Blair White, or maybe perhaps likes a trans person that maybe we would find more objectionable. Is there some value in maybe having the person kind of like take that first step where they're like, well, I have this trans person that I like that maybe we all do not like, but is that like possibly like a gateway for being able to get them to, you know, actually take the step over to be like, well, you know, that person's a little bit troublesome. You should actually like get more into trans discourse and like actually see what's up with our plight, besides just what your favorite trans person thinks. Or do you think that people like Blair White are more damaging to the trans cause than positive?
I think that Blair White is part of the alt-right pipeline. That's all I have to say about that. She's not a good influence. It's not a good thing. She's part of the alt-right pipeline.
Yeah, I'd say she's more destructive than anything else.
Yeah, I used to be a fan of her, but recently I've come to realize that her content is not helping trans people at all, and more often than not, she just kind of gives voice to a lot of these conservative transphobic talking points, which is why I've not been a fan of her these past few years.
Yeah, Blair White is a person who capitalizes on the issues in the trans community in order to further her own fame and message. Now, that's not to say that she is going to make people actively necessarily hate trans people more. I think that there's some value in at least someone saying, okay, I know at least one trans person that I don't disagree with and that seems reasonable to me. And, you know, that could have some value, but at the end of the day, you're talking specifically about Blair White. And yes, she is part of the alt-right pipeline. Just in general, I think that we're all doing a good job right now of being voices of the trans community, and therefore, and doing it in public, doing it on a stream. And I just want to give a little round of applause for that, man. Like we're not hiding in a basement somewhere, you know, hoping that nobody knows we're trans. And while I do see the value in having the occasional like trans celebrity blow up and
we're not touching Candace Owens. She tests so many terrible historical takes, and she bothers me so deeply that we just won't talk about that for a while until I am properly prepared to enter into that conversation in a constructive way.
At least expose people to trans people in general. I think that when you talk specifically about Blair White, that's a problem.
Carbon. And then we'll have Salem and Evelyn say a thing, and then we'll be out of here. We'll let Denying say a thing too if he wants to.
Is this closing statements? I'm sorry.
Kinda. It's just like, do you think that people that like, if my Uncle Buck in West Virginia likes Blair White, like, is that a negative thing for trans discourse over time? Like, have we opened the door possibly for Uncle Buck, or is that actually a negative thing? Like, now it's gonna be harder to get him on board with trans discourse.
I think anybody who listens to the mantras of listen to X minority group is already like I guess like 50% of lost cause. If anybody says listen to trans people, listen to black people, listen to gay people or something, and then like you can't be upset when people listen to the person of that minority group that agrees with them the most. So I think the best thing is to reject that premise entirely, that you should just be listening to somebody from that minority group. And I think it is better to encourage open thought and like open discourse and not shame people for disagreeing with someone of a minority group just because they're of that minority group. There are a lot of people who are dumb, who come from any minority group, who have really bad arguments, who cannot represent themselves well or the community in a way that is like productive to discourse and will just harm everybody in the future. So I think for your Uncle Buck, I would say if he agrees most with Blair White, try and extend your research a little past just the trans people that agree with him, which is pretty much just Blair White and Buck Angel. So I'm pretty sure he'll find plenty of trans people that he can listen to for different opinions.
So I'm hearing it's good that Uncle Buck likes Blair White. At least he doesn't just hate all trans people.
No, well, if that's what I said, then I apologize. That's not what I meant to communicate. What I meant to say is that, like, he should not be listening to just Blair White and then saying, yeah, I do listen to trans people. If he likes Blair White for, like, a bunch of reasons, yeah, that's one thing. But if he's listening to Blair White because somebody told him to listen to trans people, like, because they speak for the community or whatever, then that's a pretty bad idea. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I understand. My bad, I misheard a word there. Salem, Evelyn, Denying, round us out here. What's up?
I'm just here for emotional support for Evelyn, but I just wanted to say that there's definitely a trans genocide going on right now in the U.S., and it's bullshit to think otherwise.
3 hours and 8 minutes in.
Is there an African American genocide in the U.S. going on right now?
Oh, definitely, it's been that for sure.
Evelyn, go.
Thank you.
Sorry, what's going on?
I don't know. You joined the
I didn't
live
hear
chat
what you
somehow.
said. Yeah. So okay, so
we're on the trans genocide.
No, I don't. Yeah, I know we're on the trans genocide. Okay, got you. So anyway, I just wanted to discuss something that I was trying to say in the text chat, which is for those out there who are, I think there's a lot of focus on federal law. I think that it's important that people, like for instance, if you're like a trans ally or a trans person, try and get enough support to run, even if it's a third-party candidate for your city or whatever. Try and become mayor of wherever you live, or join a city council or something like that, because that's going to do far more good in the long run.
Will and his channel will back any one of you that runs for office, okay? I think that'd be pretty based. We should get all of Twitch poll to rally behind some person running for some bumfuck middle of nowhere office. That would be hilarious.
You'll have a support network you can never imagine.
Denying, would you like to say anything to end us off here?
I think y'all actually imported yourselves really well and were really sharp and concise with a lot of your statements. I actually thank you for coming. It was actually great to listen to y'all. I don't really agree with many of the proposition that it is a trans genocide, but it was really interesting to listen to Lux. Although one thing that might need to be kind of mentioned with the rhetoric stuff, it's kind of important. While yes, for example, the term genocide is usually assumed to be in popular consciousness associated with the Holocaust, I don't really think this is. We can kind of see this, for example, with the current Uyghur situation, where this isn't something analogous to the Holocaust, but in popular.
How many different genocides did I discuss? In general, just in this reaction stream, just a thought. Or potential genocides, or positions that are arguably genocides, or how many times did I point out that there is not a universal agreement on what is and is not a genocide in the academic community, for example, the Holodomor.
Use it's called genocide, right? So we shouldn't really fall into this whole genocide is analogous to the Holocaust trap.
All right, everybody. Let's go around a circle, say your tags, and we'll be done. We'll start with Zonia.
Hey guys, Zonia Dead at Twitch or Zonia TV on YouTube, and yeah, I cover a lot of social topics, cover some politics, occasional drama as well, and on rare occasion I do panels. But and for closing, I guess you want us to do a closing statement as well?
Sure, fuck it. Yeah, say your name in a closing statement.
Okay, so for a closing statement, I'm kind of going with what my opening was in a way. I don't think it's very helpful for us to be trying to get everybody to get on board with this one word, especially when that word is going to have a lot of people going and saying, what are you talking about? This is crazy that you're calling this a genocide. And I think a lot of the people who would not describe the conditions that we go through as a genocide would still be appalled by those conditions and would want to address those conditions. So I think that is really important that we actually talk about those issues. I think there's a lot of work that we can do in red states to both provide mutual aid, provide people medical support, etc. I think that there are a lot of things that we can address and that we should address instead of just trying to get everybody to jump on to this word that gives alarm. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it's helpful. I think it just causes people to get into debates like we're in today about this stuff and doesn't actually do anything. And it feels kind of like a lazy thing to really hinge a lot of your argumentation on. So that's my position. I would hope that people come over to my stream. I'll talk to you about all the conditions that we face and how dire they are. So, and I hope that you listen to what I say. Anyways, thank you for having me on, Will.
Thank you for coming, Sonia. Carbon.
Sorry, I am unmuted this time. Okay. I think you're free to use whatever language, rhetoric, or terminology you want. If you misrepresent a movement or you make bad arguments, then I'm sorry, it's on you if that backfires. I encourage everybody, including people that agree with me, to have a little bit of introspection when you're making arguments and see what people are actually responding to. Are they actually responding to your arguments? Are they responding to something that you didn't say? Obviously everybody slips up every now and then, but listening to what people's grievances actually are, whether it's with the term or whether it's with disagreement, whether about systemic discrimination in general. I think that can be useful. Unfortunately, if we do not think about how our rhetoric looks to other people, we cannot be mad about how other people are going to react to our rhetoric. Also, if I'm going to plug my Twitter, it's p-politics. I don't stream right now. Whenever life stops fucking me in the ass, I will start streaming, but that's going to be a while. So that's me. Appreciate you having me on, Will. This has been fun.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming on. Lux.
Hi, I'm Luxander, and the best place to find me is on luxander.net. It's got all the links there. I talk about politics, and I stream 3 times a week talking about basically the part of the reason why I'm so firm in my definition of the word genocide argument today is because I have been, like many of you, actively watching all of this rhetoric. I've been listening to what people like Marjorie Taylor Greene have been saying. So if you're interested in getting some of the deep dives on what the intent behind the words is, that what they're implying, what the legal situation actually is, we read the laws, we look at those things. So thank you very much. If anybody is interested in subscribing, we would love to have you over in the Horde. For my closing statement, I just want to say, I guess first of all, I had no idea that coming onto this panel was going to be so stacked. I didn't realize that I was going to be the only person making the arguments that I was going to be making. So
it's okay. You did a fantastic job, Luxander.
I believe that I'm going to remain firm on where I am. Nothing in this discussion has made me think that I should relent in the way that I describe this, because those are the facts as I see them. And you know what? It kind of seems like there are some people whose brains are going to shut off when you say the word genocide, and there's going to be some people who say, wait, what are you talking about? And then I get to explain. And I think that cowing to the idea that, our rhetoric isn't going to be effective if we call this a trans genocide, this is what the Overton window being stolen from us is. If you constantly capitulate to centrists, and if you constantly soften your language to make things seem less scary than they truly actually are, in my mind, that is the failure. So there need to be people who are I'm going to stay firmly left on whatever the issue is. There are, it's not a popular position in this country that there should not be such a thing as landlords, and that your property should be expropriated if you are a landlord. I'm going to remain firm on that because someone needs to have that stance, and we can't cow on every single one of these issues.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I could have sworn there was one more of you that thought the trans genocide was real. But
thank you, Evelyn. By the way,
Lux, I thought you did a really good job in this incredibly stacked panel. To the point where I'm honestly still leaning towards it actually being a genocide.
You stacked the panel. You stacked the panel.
I feel like nobody actually made any arguments against the idea that it's a genocide. Everybody just said, let's not call it that. So that's a whole other discussion.
I feel like we were way more nuanced than that. I don't think I don't believe that most people here were saying it's
You were not more nuanced than that.
not a genocide or it is, and let's not call it that. I think we had a lot of really nuanced and detailed disagreements on either the approach or the language, depending on who it was you're talking about. So I wouldn't reduce it down to that.
I don't mean it to be like that. I legit thought there was literally one other person on here that was just like, no, full hog, transgenocide is happening right this very moment. That is so strange.
I mean, you basically had
must have misread it. I mean, because we all agreed the same thing though. Like at the end of the day, like
well, you basically had 4 of us agreeing that it basically could be justified as a genocide, that it could be argued as a genocide. There are degrees to which each of us will use that word to describe it. So
yeah, I mean, I definitely think we're probably at some stage of it. It's just like I think that a lot of minorities are at some stage of it, and calling it a genocide actively is kind of like calling a murder before it's happened. It's like there's
That's the best time to call something a murder. It's the best time to stop a murder before it's happened. Stopping a murder after the fact is not terribly efficient.
There's a systemic elimination of people, and then there's the things leading up to it. If we're still in the phase of things leading up to that elimination, we still have a chance to stop that from happening. If that makes any sense.
Still a genocide, though.
All right.
Thank you. Oh my God, so much.
Johnny Scarlet. Go.
Okay.
Still a genocide when nobody's actually been killed.
No, because
All right,
Will and I discussed
all
this
right.
before, and the key word in that was in part in the definition, and parts of
Salem,
the genocide.
Salem, I love you. Salem, I love you, but I literally have to go before 6:45,
All right.
or I'm going to be
All right.
destroyed.
Well, that person's wrong.
All right, everybody will get an ending statement. So Johnny Scarlet, shouts out where you're at, and then yeah.
I was shouting at Salem. I said Evelyn. I meant Salem. Thank you.
Okay. If you've never seen me before, hi, my name is Johnny. You can find me at Johnny Scarlet on Twitch. I stream Monday through Friday. I'm an educational channel. I am interested in philosophy as well as math. And we do occasionally discuss things like art history. And if that sounds cool to you, then please do go over and give my channel a follow. I did come in with the intention and with the expectation that this was going to be more of a discussion panel, less of a we're all going to have a hardline stance. I came in with the idea that my mind could be changed, and I think that several people did a very good job of changing my mind to the point where I think that there is an attempt at elimination of trans people. Again, as I stated, while I agree with many of these classifications, it's not going to be something that I personally use in my advocacy, most likely not right now, because I don't know that it's an effective rhetorical tool. That being said, I really appreciate everybody who came out today, and I appreciate you, Will. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you, Johnny. Everybody follow everybody on the panel. Support. Rosemary, where can we find you? And closing statements, any last little bits you'd like to say?
Yeah, of course. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/c/Rosemullet. That's ROSEMULET. On Twitter, I'm the real Rosemullet, but without the E in the. I would say I think that we all have the same goals. I think that's what's important. I think we all want what's best for trans people, and I think that's important to acknowledge the common ground that we have here. And overall, I think this was a pretty productive conversation, and I just like the fact that we have this conversation. We all have our disagreements about this stuff, but I think it's important that we talk about this. We have open minds about the whole thing. Obviously, I think a lot of us, like, I'm kind of stuck in my ways, but if someone gives a good enough argument, I'm willing to change my mind. I've changed my mind, and I've admitted that I've been wrong in some stuff before. I'm just very happy that we had this conversation. I'm looking forward to this for a while. I still believe that there isn't a genocide, but like I said, I'm just happy we had the conversation. Was really hyped for this, and I think it went great. So thank you, Will, for hosting us, and thanks everyone for coming out here. It's really cool.
Yo, Rose, are you that TikTok girl?
You know about that? Wait, really?
No, that was hella weird.
Wait, you know about my TikTok? Oh my God, DM me. Oh no.
No, that shit was nasty.
Let's keep this on the rails. Okay, Salem, where can we find you? And ending statement, and then I know you've basically been here for 15 seconds, but...
Yeah, no, I'm Salem. Probably banned from your Discord. Hey. No ads, though.
All right, thanks.
You can find Salem in my Discord.
Yeah, I hang out in there.
There you go. Evelyn, closing statements. Where can we find you or not, if you prefer?
I'd rather not be found, so I'm going to skip that part. All I want to say is, I don't think it's wrong to use the term genocide to refer to this. I also, Cookie brought up that there's also a black genocide going on, and I would say that there's also a Mexican genocide going on. The thing that disappoints me in particular, when you're looking at the two major federalist parties, which are the Democrats and the Republicans, is Biden has been in office for, close to 3 years now. And he still hasn't done anything about the camps that are on the border between Mexico and the United States. He hasn't done anything to reduce the numbers there. So I don't trust the Democrats and by extension Biden to do anything about this. I think you really need to start building your own power structures.
All right, and last but not least, Denying.
I think I already said my ending piece. You can find me at mastodon.eu, at Denying History, or Denying History on Twitter. Not really specifically hard to find. Or I guess in Will's Discord.
All right. Well, thanks for coming out, everybody. I think that's a wrap on the Trans Genocide panel. I really appreciate everyone for coming out. It was a really good learning experience for me, and I hope that chat got something out of it too. And thanks, Admiral Love and Max the Confessor, for donating stream. That's awesome.
Okay. I am going to go to bed. I want my 3 hours back. Alexander was great. Everyone else was not really prepared. That's that. We will be reconvening tomorrow in the evening will I be talking to Emily Likens, the trauma-informed doula and a close personal friend, about reproductive justice. It should be a good time, although I am programming opposite President Sunday. Therefore, I expect no one will watch it in fact, and will catch the VOD afterwards, which I will do my best to upload as quickly as possible. Other than that, we are still working with an artist to get some branding around here, and that is an ongoing process. The bills are paid. We are moving along. And I thank everyone for coming out. I hope you all have a good evening, and feel free to subscribe if you have not already.